The Awakening. There is a cave in the mountains of northern Spain that was never meant to be found. In 2019, a team of geological surveyors working for a mining company stumbled upon an entrance hidden behind a rock slide that had sealed it for approximately 12,000 years. What they discovered inside would challenge everything we think we know about our ancestors and force us to ask an uncomfortable question. What if ancient humans were not primitive versions of us, but something far more advanced in ways we have forgotten how to measure? The cave walls were covered in paintings, but these were unlike any prehistoric art ever documented. The images showed humans performing acts that seemed impossible, figures leaping distances that would require Olympic-level athleticism, hunting scenes where humans appeared to be communicating with animals, diagrams of the human body with specific points marked and connected by lines that bore an uncanny resemblance to acupuncture meridians, a system supposedly developed thousands of years later in China. But the most disturbing discovery was not on the walls. It was the remains. 17 skeletal remains were found in the deepest chamber of the cave, arranged in a perfect circle around a central stone altar. The bones showed peculiarities that initially baffled the anthropologists. The skulls had significantly larger pineal gland cavities than modern humans. The bone density was nearly 30% greater than contemporary human skeletons. Most puzzling of all, the eye sockets were positioned in a way that suggested a wider field of vision. An analysis of the inner ear structure indicated an ability to hear frequencies far beyond our modern range. The scientific team was sworn to secrecy. The site was classified. Within 6 months, 3 of the lead researchers had resigned, and the official report concluded that the remains were simply anatomical anomalies, statistical outliers that meant nothing significant about human evolution. But one researcher kept digging. Dr. Sarah Chen had spent 15 years studying the cognitive capabilities of prehistoric humans, and something about the official explanation did not sit right with her. She began connecting dots that others refused to see. She examined reports from other archaeological sites around the world, sites where similar anomalies had been noted and then quietly dismissed or explained away. What she found was a pattern. From the caves of Lascaux to the temples of Göbekli Tepe, from the Aboriginal songlines of Australia to the shamanic traditions of the Amazon, there were consistent descriptions of human abilities that we today would classify as superhuman. Enhanced night vision, the ability to track animals across vast distances through means that went beyond simple footprints, healing abilities that modern medicine cannot explain, forms of communication that transcended spoken language. These were not myths, they were memories. Dr. Chen's research led her to a controversial hypothesis. Approximately 10,000 years ago, during the period we call the Neolithic Revolution, humanity underwent a transformation. But it was not the advancement that historians celebrate. It was a regression. We traded superpowers for civilization, extraordinary abilities for agriculture, a deep connection with the natural world for the security of stored grain and permanent settlements. We became weaker, and we called it progress. Consider for a moment what we know about human evolution. For nearly 200,000 years, Homo sapiens lived as hunter-gatherers. Our ancestors survived ice ages, megafauna, and countless environmental challenges without the technology we consider essential today. They thrived in environments that would kill most modern humans within days. They navigated thousands of miles without maps or compasses. They identified hundreds of plant species and their uses without written guides. They tracked animals through forests and across plains using senses we can barely comprehend. How did they do it? The conventional answer is that they were simply adapted to their environment through practice and necessity. But this explanation falls apart when you examine the specifics. Indigenous trackers in the Kalahari Desert can follow animal trails that are completely invisible to trained modern observers, even when those observers know exactly what to look for. They do not just see more footprints, they perceive something else entirely, something that involves reading the energy and disturbance patterns in the environment at a level that seems almost supernatural. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous shamans consume plants that allow them to enter states of consciousness where they claim to communicate directly with the forest itself, receiving information about medicinal properties of plants they have never encountered before. Western scientists dismissed this as primitive superstition until they discovered that many of these plant combinations were indeed pharmaceutically active, in ways that should have required extensive laboratory testing to identify. The shamans were accessing information through means we do not understand. Aboriginal Australians practice a form of navigation called wayfinding that allows them to cross hundreds of miles of featureless desert without getting lost. When researchers tried to understand this ability, they discovered it involved an integration of environmental awareness, astronomical knowledge, and something the Aboriginals called the dreamtime, a state of consciousness that connects them to the land in a way that Western science has no framework to explain. These are not quaint cultural practices. These are the remnants of abilities that were once universal to humanity. The San people of southern Africa, one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth, have documented cases of hunters who can run down antelope through persistence hunting, tracking the animal for hours until it collapses from exhaustion. But the remarkable part is not the endurance, it is how they track. San hunters describe entering a state where they become the animal, feeling its fatigue, knowing which direction it will turn before it turns. They are not following footprints, they are following something else, a connection that modern humans have lost access to. In Siberia, the Evenki people practice a form of reindeer herding that involves a telepathic connection with the animals. Western observers have documented instances where herders knew exactly where their reindeer were located across vast tundra distances, without any technological aids. When asked how they knew, the herders looked confused by the question. Of course they knew. The reindeer told them. These abilities sound like fantasy, but they are documented, observed, and real. The question is not whether they exist. The question is why most of humanity has lost them. Dr. Chen's research pointed to a specific moment in history, the adoption of agriculture. Around 10,000 years ago, in a region called the Fertile Crescent, humans made a choice that would alter our species forever. We stopped following the herds and the seasons. We stopped moving with the natural rhythms of the earth. We planted crops. We built permanent settlements. We stored food for the future instead of trusting in the abundance of the present moment. And something inside us began to shut down. The human body is not designed for agricultural life. Our ancestors evolved for movement, for diversity in diet, for constant engagement with a changing environment. When we settled down, our sensory systems began to atrophy. Our pineal glands, exposed to artificial light and repetitive daily schedules, began to calcify. Our gut microbiome, deprived of the incredible diversity of wild foods, simplified and weakened. Our DNA, responding to the new environment, began switching off genes that were no longer necessary for survival in a farming community. We lost our night vision because we lived in houses with fires that kept the darkness at bay. We lost our acute hearing because we no longer needed to detect predators in the silence of the wild. We lost our ability to sense electromagnetic fields because we no longer migrated with the seasons, using the Earth's magnetic field as a guide. We lost our heightened intuition because we replaced it with language and writing and logic. Generation by generation, the abilities faded. The children of farmers could not do what their hunter-gatherer grandparents could do. And because the agricultural lifestyle was successful in terms of population growth and resource accumulation, the change was reinforced. Communities that kept the old ways were eventually absorbed or eliminated by agricultural societies that had superior numbers and organization. But the abilities did not disappear completely. They went dormant. The DNA is still there. The neural pathways can still be activated. The potential remains locked inside every human being alive today. We are not a different species from our prehistoric ancestors. We are the same species, running drastically different software. This is not a story about a lost golden age or a mystical past that we should romanticize. This is about understanding what we actually are. Human potential is not something we are reaching toward through technology and progress. It is something we once had and traded away without realizing the cost. The evidence is everywhere once you know how to look for it. Ancient texts from cultures around the world describe human abilities that we now classify as supernatural. The yogis of India speak of siddhis, supernatural powers that arise from meditation and mastery of the body. The Celtic Druids were said to possess abilities of prophecy and healing. Chinese Taoist masters described achieving immortality through practices that cultivated internal energy. These were not fantasies. These were training manuals for abilities that humans once possessed naturally. Even our own religious texts contain hints of what was lost. The Bible describes humans living for hundreds of years before the flood, then suddenly dropping to normal lifespans afterward. It speaks of giants, of men who walked with God, of prophets who performed miracles. What if these were not metaphors? What if they were memories of a time when human abilities were far greater than they are now? The flood myths that appear in cultures around the world may represent something more than geological events. They may mark the moment when the old world, the world where humans possessed these abilities, was washed away and replaced by the agricultural civilizations we know today. The survivors of that transition carried the memories, but they could no longer perform the feats their ancestors had accomplished. Modern science is beginning to catch up to what ancient humans knew. Research into human perception has discovered that we can sense magnetic fields, though most people are unaware of this ability. Studies on meditation show that it can activate regions of the brain associated with heightened sensory perception and altered states of consciousness. Experiments with fasting and specific dietary interventions have shown they can trigger genetic changes that restore more primitive metabolic functions. We are starting to understand that the human body contains capacities we have forgotten how to use. The question is whether we can remember how to activate them again. Dr. Chen's research was never published in a mainstream journal. The academic establishment was not ready for the implications. But her work continues, quietly, in collaboration with indigenous communities who have maintained connection to the old ways. Together, they are mapping the techniques, the practices, the environmental factors that allow certain abilities to remain active or to be restored. This is not about going back to living in caves. This is about understanding what we lost and deciding whether we want to reclaim it. The human body is capable of far more than we have been taught. The senses can be sharpened. The mind can be expanded. The connection to the natural world can be restored. But first, we need to understand what happened. We need to trace the path from who we were to who we became. We need to examine the evidence that has been hidden, dismissed, or explained away. We need to look at the cost of civilization with honest eyes. What you are about to discover will change how you see yourself and your potential. The story of humanity is not a story of progression from primitive to advanced. It is a story of trade-offs, of abilities exchanged for security, of power sacrificed for comfort. Our ancestors were not inferior versions of us stumbling around in the dark. They were humans, operating at full capacity, with senses and abilities we can barely imagine. They could do things we would call magic, not because they were special, but because they had not yet forgotten how to be fully human. The question is, do we want to remember? The evidence they don't want you to see. The Smithsonian Institution has a problem with giant skeletons. Throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s, newspapers across America reported the discovery of enormous human remains. We are not talking about tall individuals. We are talking about skeletons measuring 7, 8, even 10 feet in height, with bone structures that suggested incredible strength. Hundreds of these discoveries were reported, often by credible sources including local sheriffs, doctors, and university professors. Then they vanished. According to official records, most of these skeletons were sent to the Smithsonian for further study. But when researchers began asking questions in the 1990s, the Smithsonian claimed to have no record of them. No photographs, no documentation, no bones. It was as if they had never existed, despite the newspaper articles, the witness testimonies, and the detailed descriptions that survived in historical archives. This pattern of disappearing evidence is not isolated to America. Around the world, archaeological discoveries that challenge our understanding of human capabilities have a strange tendency to vanish, get reclassified, or simply never make it into mainstream academic discussion. In the Lovelock Cave in Nevada, the Paiute tribe had oral traditions about a race of red-haired giants called the Siteka, who once inhabited the region. When the cave was excavated in 1911, they found remains of individuals with red hair, some measuring over 7 feet tall. The artifacts and remains were scattered across various museums, and the significance of the discovery was quietly minimized. Today, if you mention the Lovelock giants, you will be told they are a fringe theory, despite the physical evidence that was documented. But the suppression of evidence goes far beyond unusual skeletal remains. It extends to artifacts, sites, and discoveries that suggest prehistoric humans possessed knowledge and abilities that do not fit the narrative of linear progress from primitive to civilized. Consider the Antikythera mechanism, a bronze device recovered from a Greek shipwreck in 1901. For decades, it sat in a museum, dismissed as a curiosity. When modern technology finally allowed researchers to examine its internal structure, they discovered it was an astronomical calculator of extraordinary sophistication, capable of predicting eclipses, tracking lunar cycles, and modeling the movements of planets. It dated to approximately 100 BCE, but the level of engineering required to create such a device supposedly did not exist for another 1,000 years. The mechanism was not an isolated anomaly. It proved that ancient humans possessed technical knowledge far beyond what historians had assumed, but rather than prompting a re-evaluation of ancient capabilities, it was simply categorized as an exceptional outlier, and the narrative continued unchanged. This is the pattern. When evidence appears that challenges the established timeline of human development, it gets explained away, minimized, or ignored. The Göbekli Tepe site in Turkey has forced some revision of this narrative, but not nearly as much as it should have. This massive stone temple complex dates to approximately 9600 BCE, making it older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It was built by hunter-gatherers who supposedly lacked the organization, technology, and surplus resources necessary for such monumental construction. The site features massive T-shaped pillars weighing up to 20 tons, carved with intricate reliefs of animals and symbols. According to conventional archaeology, this should not exist. Hunter-gatherers were supposed to be small, scattered groups focused on survival, not capable of organizing the labor and resources needed to build something like Göbekli Tepe. The discovery forced archaeologists to push back the timeline of human civilization, but it did not prompt them to question the fundamental assumptions about human capabilities. What if Göbekli Tepe was not an anomaly? What if it was normal for humans of that era, and we have simply lost the ability to understand how they thought and what they could do? The construction techniques alone pose questions that remain unanswered. How did they move 20-ton stones without wheels, without metal tools, without draft animals? The standard answer is that they used logs as rollers and massive amounts of human labor. But this explanation requires ignoring the mathematical precision of the construction, the astronomical alignments, and the fact that similar megalithic sites around the world show comparable engineering feats that supposedly independent cultures achieved using the same impossible techniques. In Peru, the walls of Sacsayhuaman feature stones weighing over 200 tons, fitted together with such precision that you cannot slide a piece of paper between them. The stones have irregular, interlocking shapes that would be challenging to create even with modern computer-aided design. The Inca, who inherited these structures, claimed they did not build them. They said the walls were there when their civilization arose, built by giants in the time before. Every culture has these stories. Every ancient civilization points backward to an earlier time when humans could do things that are no longer possible. The Egyptians claimed their knowledge came from the gods, or from the time of the first time, a golden age before recorded history. The Maya spoke of previous worlds and previous humanities that possessed great wisdom. The Hindu Vedas describe yugas, ages of the world where human abilities declined progressively from a golden age to the current age of darkness. These are not just myths. They are collective memories of human capabilities that existed and were lost. Dr. Chen's research uncovered something particularly fascinating in the ancient texts. Across multiple cultures, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, there are consistent descriptions of specific human abilities. The details match too closely to be coincidence. The ability to see in complete darkness. Multiple ancient texts describe this as a natural human capacity, not as something supernatural. The Tibetan texts speak of cultivating internal light that allows vision without external illumination. Similar descriptions appear in Celtic, Aboriginal Australian, and Native American traditions. Modern science has discovered that human eyes do produce biophotons, extremely weak light emissions, and that some individuals can develop enhanced night vision through specific practices. What if this was once a standard human capability that atrophied when we began living with artificial light? The ability to sense water and minerals underground. Dowsing, the practice of using a rod or pendulum to locate underground water, is dismissed as pseudoscience, despite the fact that it demonstrably works in many cases. Multiple double-blind studies have shown that experienced dowsers can locate water with accuracy significantly above chance. The military has quietly used dowsers to locate underground tunnels and bunkers. Ancient texts describe this as a natural human sense, an ability to feel the electromagnetic signatures of different materials beneath the earth. Hunter-gatherers would have relied on this ability to locate water sources in unfamiliar territory. The ability to predict weather changes. Indigenous peoples around the world demonstrate a capacity to forecast weather with accuracy that rivals modern meteorology, using no instruments at all. They describe feeling the changes in their bodies, sensing shifts in air pressure, humidity, and electromagnetic fields. This is not folklore. It is documented, observable, and reproducible. Ancient humans, living constantly exposed to the elements, would have developed this sense to a degree we can barely comprehend. The ability to communicate without spoken language. Every hunter-gatherer culture that has been studied demonstrates forms of communication that go beyond words. The San people of Africa can coordinate complex hunts using minimal verbal communication, seeming to know what others in the group are thinking or planning. Aboriginal Australians describe a form of telepathic connection with family members, knowing when relatives are in danger or need help across vast distances. These reports are consistent across cultures and across time periods. What if language, as powerful as it is, actually replaced a more direct form of mind-to-mind communication that humans once possessed? The evidence for these abilities exists in ancient texts, in indigenous practices, and in the archaeological record. But it is scattered, disconnected, and deliberately ignored by mainstream academia because it does not fit the model of human evolution that we have invested so much in defending. there is a reason for this resistance. Accepting that ancient humans possessed abilities we have lost would require a fundamental rewriting of history, anthropology, and our understanding of human potential. It would mean admitting that civilization, for all its benefits, came with a cost that we have never honestly accounted for. It would mean acknowledging that progress is not linear, that we have lost something precious in our race toward technological advancement. The academic establishment is not equipped to handle this kind of paradigm shift. Careers are built on established models. Funding depends on research that fits within accepted frameworks. A researcher who suggests that prehistoric humans could do things modern humans cannot will not get tenure. They will not get published in prestigious journals. They will be marginalized, mocked, and professionally destroyed. Dr. Chen experienced this firsthand. After presenting preliminary findings at a conference, she was accused of promoting pseudoscience. Her research funding was quietly cut. She was told, in polite academic language, that she needed to return to more conventional research topics if she wanted to maintain her position. She refused, and within 2 years she was no longer affiliated with any major university. But she kept working, and what she discovered was more disturbing than the evidence itself. She found a pattern of active suppression. Documents that had been cataloged in museum archives would suddenly be missing. Researchers who got too close to certain conclusions would find their work blocked from publication. Indigenous informants who shared traditional knowledge with anthropologists would be told by subsequent researchers that their information was not credible, that they must be misremembering or exaggerating. There seemed to be an unspoken agreement within the academic establishment to maintain the narrative of linear progress, to dismiss any evidence that suggested human abilities had declined rather than advanced. This was not a conspiracy in the traditional sense. It was something more subtle and more powerful, a collective commitment to a worldview that could not accommodate contrary evidence without collapsing. Consider what it would mean if the evidence were accepted. Every museum would need to be reorganized. Every textbook would need to be rewritten. Every theory about human evolution and development would need to be reconsidered. The implications would extend beyond academia into philosophy, religion, and our basic understanding of what it means to be human. If ancient humans possessed abilities we have lost, then we are not the pinnacle of human evolution. We are a diminished version of what humanity once was. And if we are diminished, then everything we have built, all of our civilization and technology, is revealed as compensation for abilities we sacrificed. This is an uncomfortable truth. It is easier to dismiss the evidence, to call it pseudoscience, to maintain the comforting belief that we are more advanced than our ancestors in every meaningful way. But the evidence keeps appearing. New discoveries keep contradicting the established narrative, and more researchers, like Dr. Chen, are beginning to ask questions that the establishment cannot answer without abandoning the framework they have spent centuries constructing. In 2012, a research team in Indonesia discovered evidence of sophisticated maritime navigation dating back 50,000 years. Early humans were crossing open ocean, traveling between islands separated by hundreds of miles of water, at a time when they supposedly lacked the cognitive ability to plan such journeys or the technology to build seaworthy vessels. The discovery was published, noted, and then quietly forgotten. It did not change the textbooks. It did not alter the mainstream narrative. In South Africa, researchers found abstract art and evidence of symbolic thinking dating back 100,000 years, pushing back the timeline of human cognitive sophistication by tens of thousands of years. The discovery made headlines briefly, then disappeared from public awareness. The implications were too large to integrate into existing models. In Siberia, scientists discovered that ancient humans survived in extreme Arctic conditions 30,000 years ago, without the technology we consider necessary for such environments. They had no Gore-Tex, no modern insulation, no advanced tools. Yet they thrived in conditions that would kill a modern human, equipped with the best survival gear within days. How? The question is not seriously pursued because the answer might suggest that human physiology was fundamentally different, more adapted, more capable than it is now. The pattern is clear. Evidence that challenges the narrative of linear human progress gets acknowledged briefly and then buried under layers of academic caution and methodological criticism. The discoveries remain in the literature, technically available to anyone who looks, but they are never integrated into the larger story we tell about ourselves. This is not an accident. This is not simply academic conservatism. This is active protection of a worldview that serves specific interests. The agricultural industrial model of civilization depends on the belief that we have progressed, that we are more capable and more intelligent than our ancestors, that the sacrifices we have made for civilization were necessary and beneficial. If this belief is challenged, if people begin to understand what was lost, they might start questioning the entire structure of modern society. They might ask why we work jobs we hate to buy things we don't need. They might wonder why we are disconnected from nature, from our bodies, from each other. They might question why mental illness, chronic disease, and existential despair are epidemic in the most technologically advanced societies, while being relatively rare in the few remaining hunter-gatherer cultures. These questions are dangerous. They threaten the foundations of civilization as we know it. So the evidence that might prompt these questions gets suppressed, not through overt conspiracy, but through the subtle mechanisms of academic gatekeeping, funding priorities, and cultural assumptions. But the truth has a way of surfacing. Indigenous peoples who maintain the old ways continue to demonstrate abilities that should not be possible according to modern understanding. The archaeological record continues to produce discoveries that do not fit the narrative, and individuals who practice the techniques described in ancient texts continue to develop abilities that mainstream science insists are impossible. The evidence is there. It has always been there. The question is whether we are willing to see it, to accept what it means, and to reconsider everything we thought we knew about human potential and human history. Because once you see the pattern, once you understand what has been hidden and why, there is no going back. You cannot unsee the truth. You cannot return to the comfortable belief that we are the most advanced version of humanity that has ever existed. We are not the pinnacle. We are the remnant. And the abilities we lost are not gone. They are dormant, waiting for the conditions that might allow them to awaken again. What your ancestors could actually do. The human eye can detect a single photon of light. This is not theoretical. This has been experimentally verified. Under perfect conditions, in complete darkness, the human eye is sensitive enough to register the impact of a single quantum of light hitting the retina. This is the absolute physical limit of visual sensitivity. Our eyes are already operating at the edge of what is physically possible. Yet, we cannot see in the dark. Or rather, modern humans cannot see in the dark. But there is extensive documentation that some humans can, and that this ability was once far more common than it is today. The Moken people, sea nomads living in the waters around Thailand and Myanmar, have children who can see clearly underwater without goggles. Studies have shown that Moken children can adjust the shape of their eye lenses and constrict their pupils to achieve perfect underwater vision, something that Western children cannot do. This is not genetic. When Moken children adopt a modern lifestyle and stop spending hours each day diving, they lose this ability. It is a trainable adaptation that develops in response to environmental demands. If the human eye can adapt to see clearly underwater through practice, what other visual capabilities might be accessible through the right training and environmental conditions? The Himba tribe in Namibia can distinguish dozens of shades of green that look identical to Western observers. When tested, they can immediately spot a square that is slightly different in hue from surrounding squares, a task that takes Western subjects significantly longer or that they fail completely. This is not because they have different eyes. It is because their language and culture have trained their visual processing to make distinctions that urban humans do not make. Now imagine a culture where survival depends on night hunting, where every evening for thousands of generations humans operated in near complete darkness. What visual abilities would develop? What neural pathways would strengthen? Multiple indigenous cultures describe a form of night vision that goes beyond simple dark adaptation. The Sami people of northern Scandinavia speak of being able to navigate and hunt during the polar night, when the sun does not rise for months. Aboriginal Australians describe seeing the spirits of animals in the darkness, which anthropologists interpreted as mysticism, until they realized it might be describing a form of thermal or electromagnetic sensing that allowed detection of living creatures in conditions where visual light was insufficient. The U.S. military has spent millions researching enhanced night vision, attempting to train soldiers to see better in darkness. Some programs have shown remarkable results, with soldiers developing the ability to navigate and perform tasks in light levels that would leave untrained individuals completely blind. The improvement comes not from changing the eye, but from training the brain to extract more information from minimal light input. What the military discovered through high-tech training programs, ancient humans developed naturally through environmental pressure and cultural practice. But night vision is just the beginning. The sensory capabilities that ancient humans possessed extended far beyond enhanced versions of the five senses we acknowledge today. Consider smell. The human nose can theoretically detect over 1 trillion different odors. This is a computational capacity that rivals our visual system. Yet most modern humans use only a tiny fraction of this capability. We live in environments filled with artificial scents that overwhelm and confuse our olfactory systems. We spend our lives indoors, isolated from the rich smellscape of the natural world. The Jahai people of the Malay Peninsula have a vocabulary for smells as rich and specific as English speakers have for colors. They can identify and track animals through the forest by scent alone, distinguishing between individuals of the same species, determining how long ago they passed, and predicting where they are heading. This is not superhuman. This is normal human olfactory capability being used at full capacity. Perfume makers and wine sommeliers prove that this ability can be trained even in modern humans. Professional perfumers can identify thousands of individual scent compounds and detect impurities at concentrations of parts per million. They have not mutated to develop this ability. They have simply trained a sensory system that every human possesses, but most never develop. Ancient humans lived in a world where scent was survival. They could smell water from miles away. They could detect predators upwind. They could identify edible plants and poisonous ones by scent alone. They could track prey animals for days using olfactory cues invisible to modern humans. This was not magic. This was biology being used at full capacity. Then there is touch. The human hand contains more nerve endings per square centimeter than almost any other part of the body. We can detect surface variations at the nanometer scale. We can sense temperature differences of less than 1 degree. We can feel vibrations at frequencies both below and above the range of hearing. Blind individuals often develop tactile sensitivity that seems superhuman to sighted people. They can read Braille at speeds that approach visual reading. They can navigate spaces by feeling air currents and pressure changes. They can identify people by the vibration of their footsteps. This is not compensation for lost vision. This is the tactile system operating without visual dominance, reaching its full potential. Ancient humans used their hands for everything. They made tools, tracked animals, gathered food, built shelters, all through direct, tactile engagement with the world. They could feel the difference between dozens of types of stone, identifying which would flake properly for tool making by texture alone. They could find water by feeling for moisture in the soil. They could detect the approach of weather changes through pressure shifts felt on their skin. The Kung people of the Kalahari maintained some of these abilities. They can identify animal tracks not just by looking, but by feeling them with their hands, sensing differences in compression and moisture that reveal when the track was made and how the animal was moving. They can feel the presence of underground water through subtle temperature and humidity changes at the surface. But perhaps the most striking lost ability is what ancient texts call the sixth sense, and what modern science is beginning to recognize as magnetoreception. Birds can sense magnetic fields. This is well established. They use the Earth's magnetic field for navigation during migration. Fish can sense electrical fields, using this ability to navigate and hunt in murky water. Sharks can detect the electrical signals produced by muscle contractions in prey animals. These abilities seem exotic to us, but they are simply sensory systems responding to real physical phenomena that exist in the environment. Humans have magnetite crystals in our brains, the same biological compass that birds use. We have cryptochrome proteins in our eyes that are magnetically sensitive. The hardware is there. The question is whether the software is still running. Research has shown that humans can unconsciously align themselves with magnetic north when sleeping in unfamiliar locations. Subjects in experiments have demonstrated the ability to detect when magnetic fields around them are rotated, even though they cannot consciously explain how they know. The sense exists. It is simply not conscious in most modern humans. But in ancient humans, this sense would have been crucial for navigation. How did Polynesian sailors cross thousands of miles of open ocean without instruments, arriving at tiny islands with perfect accuracy? They describe following the swell patterns, the star positions, and something else they call the sense of direction, a felt knowing of where they are in relation to land. The Vikings navigated the North Atlantic in conditions where sun and stars were invisible for weeks at a time. They used sunstones, crystals that could detect polarized light, but they also describe a sense they called the rune path, an internal compass that guided them. This was not mysticism. This was magnetoreception being used consciously. Indigenous peoples around the world describe similar abilities. Aboriginal Australians speak of songlines, paths across the land that they can feel and follow. Native American traditions speak of finding the true path, a navigation sense that does not rely on landmarks. These descriptions are consistent with magnetoreception being used as a conscious navigation tool. But the abilities extend even further into territories that modern science struggles to categorize. There is extensive documentation of what researchers call anomalous cognition, the ability to gain information through means that do not involve the recognized senses. The terminology varies: remote viewing, clairvoyance, intuition, precognition. The skepticism is intense, but the data is harder to dismiss than most people realize. The U.S. military ran a program called Stargate for over 20 years, from 1972 to 1995, investigating remote viewing as an intelligence-gathering tool. The program was classified, but declassified documents reveal that remote viewers successfully located hostages, identified secret installations, and predicted events with accuracy that exceeded chance by statistically significant margins. The program was eventually shut down not because it did not work, but because the results were inconsistent and the mechanism was not understood. But inconsistency does not mean impossibility. It means the conditions for success were not fully understood. What if remote viewing is a natural human ability that has atrophied to the point where only occasional, unreliable manifestation is possible in modern humans, but which was once far more common and reliable? Indigenous shamanic traditions from every continent describe practices for developing what they call second sight, or spirit vision, the ability to perceive events at a distance or to see beyond the physical. These are not considered supernatural abilities within these cultures. They are considered trainable skills that some individuals develop more fully than others, like any other human capability. The anthropological record is filled with examples that cannot be easily explained. Aboriginal Australians knowing that family members hundreds of miles away are in danger before any conventional communication could have reached them. Amazon shamans accurately describing the contents of sealed containers without opening them. Siberian shamans locating lost people or objects through trance states. The standard scientific response is that these are anecdotes, coincidences, confirmation bias. But when the same types of abilities are described across dozens of independent cultures, when they are integrated into practical aspects of survival and daily life, when individuals can demonstrate them reliably within their cultural context, dismissing them becomes more difficult. What if these abilities are remnants of sensory and cognitive capabilities that were once far more common? What if ancient humans, living in constant sensory engagement with a complex environment, developed forms of perception that we have lost access to because we no longer need them for survival? The pattern is consistent. Every sensory system in the human body is capable of far more than modern humans typically demonstrate. And in cultures that maintain traditional lifestyles, these capacities remain developed to levels that seem extraordinary to civilized observers. There is also the question of human physical capabilities. Modern athletes push the boundaries of what we think is possible, but even they are operating within constraints that may not have limited ancient humans. The bone density findings from prehistoric remains suggest significantly greater strength. Modern humans who undergo intense physical training can increase bone density by approximately 10 to 15%. The prehistoric remains showed 30% greater density than modern averages. This suggests a baseline level of physical stress and development that was universal in ancient populations. Greater bone density means greater muscle attachment points and stronger skeletal support for more powerful muscles. The biomechanics suggest that prehistoric humans were not just stronger than average modern humans, but stronger than modern athletes. But it was not just strength. There is evidence of endurance capabilities that exceed anything in modern sports. The practice of persistence hunting, where hunters run down prey animals over distances of 20 to 30 miles, tracking them until the animal collapses from heat exhaustion, demonstrates cardiovascular capability and heat management that would be considered elite athletic performance today. Yet this was a standard hunting technique used by everyone in the community, including individuals who would be considered middle-aged or older by modern standards. The human body is capable of remarkable adaptations when subjected to the right stresses. Modern ultra-endurance athletes demonstrate that humans can run over 100 miles without stopping, can climb mountains without supplemental oxygen, can swim across oceans. But these are individuals who dedicate their entire lives to developing these capacities. Ancient humans developed comparable or greater capacities simply through daily life. Consider healing. Every traditional culture has practices and individuals who can promote healing beyond what modern medicine considers possible. Bone fractures that heal in half the expected time, wounds that close without infection, illnesses that resolve without treatment. The mechanisms are not understood, but the outcomes are documented. Modern research into the placebo effect has revealed that human belief and expectation can trigger real physiological changes. Patients who believe they are receiving treatment show measurable improvements even when given inert substances. This demonstrates that the mind has direct influence over healing processes, but the extent of this influence remains unmapped. Ancient healing practices worked with this connection between mind and body in ways that modern medicine has abandoned. Shamanic healing, energy work, hands-on healing. All of these involve mobilizing the body's innate healing capabilities through techniques that modern science dismisses as placebo at best, fraud at worst. But what if the placebo effect is not a confounding variable to be controlled for, but rather a window into human capabilities we have forgotten how to consciously access? What if ancient humans, through practices and techniques that have been largely lost, could activate healing processes that we now consider automatic and beyond conscious control? The human immune system performs miracles every day, identifying and destroying cancer cells, fighting off pathogens, repairing damaged tissues. This all happens automatically, below the level of consciousness. But research into meditation and mind-body practices has shown that conscious intention can influence immune function. People who practice specific meditation techniques show enhanced immune markers, faster healing times, and better resistance to disease. If modern humans practicing meditation for 30 minutes a day can produce measurable improvements in immune function, what could ancient humans achieve who spent their entire lives in states of awareness that we would classify as meditative? The evidence points to a picture of human capability that is radically different from what we have been taught. Our ancestors were not primitive versions of us, stumbling through life with limited cognition and weak bodies. They were humans operating at full capacity, with sensory systems developed to their maximum potential, with physical capabilities that would astound modern observers, with forms of perception and cognition that we have lost access to. They could see better, hear better, smell better. They could sense magnetic fields, detect water underground, predict weather changes. They could track animals across vast distances, navigate without instruments, heal faster from injuries. They could access information through means we do not understand, perceive patterns we cannot see, and perform physical feats we consider superhuman. These were not superpowers in the sense of violations of natural law. These were natural human capacities being fully expressed. They were what humans could do when living in alignment with evolutionary design, when constantly challenged by complex environments, when using the full bandwidth of sensory and cognitive systems that modern life has allowed to atrophy. The question is not whether these abilities existed. The evidence is overwhelming that they did. The question is what happened to make them disappear, and whether it is possible to get them back. The Neolithic Revolution, the great turning point. 10,000 years ago, something changed in the Fertile Crescent that would alter the course of human history forever. A woman bent down and pressed seeds into the soil. It was not the first time humans had done this. People had been manipulating plants for thousands of years, encouraging useful species, transplanting them to convenient locations, protecting them from competing vegetation. But this time was different. This time the woman stayed. She built a shelter nearby. She waited for the seeds to grow. She harvested them and planted more. She did not follow the herds that season. She stayed with her garden. Within a few generations, her descendants had forgotten how to live any other way. We call this the Neolithic Revolution, the birth of agriculture, and we have been taught to see it as humanity's greatest achievement. It allowed population growth, permanent settlements, the development of civilization, art, writing, technology. Everything we consider human progress flows from that moment when we stopped wandering and started farming. But there is another way to look at it. The Neolithic Revolution was not an advancement. It was a trap. And once we walked into it, there was no way back. The archaeological evidence tells a story that most people never hear. When you compare the skeletal remains of hunter-gatherers to early farmers, the farmers are shorter. Their bones show signs of nutritional deficiencies. Their teeth are riddled with cavities. Their skeletons display evidence of repetitive stress injuries and infectious diseases that are rare or absent in hunter-gatherer populations. The transition to agriculture made humans smaller, weaker, and sicker. Studies of hunter-gatherer societies that survived into the modern era show that they worked fewer hours than agricultural peoples, had more leisure time, ate a more diverse and nutritious diet, and suffered from fewer diseases. The Kung people of the Kalahari, before being forced into settlements, worked an average of 15 to 20 hours per week procuring food. The rest of their time was spent socializing, playing, creating art, telling stories, and resting. They had no storage, no wealth accumulation, no hierarchy beyond respect for elders and skilled individuals. And they were, by all measurable standards, healthier and happier than the farmers who eventually displaced them. So why did we make the switch? If agriculture made life harder, not easier, why did it spread across the world, replacing the hunter-gatherer lifestyle that had sustained humans successfully for 200,000 years? The answer is not that agriculture was better. The answer is that agriculture was a trap that we could not escape once we entered it. Here is how the trap works. Agriculture allows higher population density. A given piece of land can support 10 to 100 times more people through farming than through hunting and gathering. This sounds like an advantage, and in pure population terms, it is. But those additional people are completely dependent on the harvest. They cannot go back to hunting and gathering because there are too many of them and too little wild land remaining. Once a group adopts agriculture, they are locked in. A bad harvest means starvation. Pests or drought or blight mean catastrophe. The only solution is to plant more, to expand the fields, to work harder. Agriculture does not free people from the struggle for survival. It intensifies it, making survival dependent on ever-increasing labor and ever-expanding cultivation. And here is the critical part. Agricultural societies can support larger populations, which means larger armies. When farmers came into contact with hunter-gatherers, the farmers could field more warriors. They could sustain longer conflicts. They could absorb losses and keep fighting. Hunter-gatherer groups, with their smaller populations and mobile lifestyle, could not compete militarily with settled agricultural societies. So agriculture spread not because it was better for individual humans, but because it was better for group survival in competition with other groups. It was an evolutionary trap at the societal level. Groups that adopted agriculture outcompeted groups that did not, even though individuals within agricultural societies were worse off than their hunter-gatherer counterparts. This is the paradox of the Neolithic Revolution. It made civilizations more powerful while making individual humans weaker. But the physical decline was only part of the story. The cognitive and sensory decline was even more profound. Hunter-gatherers needed to know their environment intimately. They needed to recognize hundreds of plant species and know their uses, growth patterns, and seasonal availability. They needed to track dozens of animal species, understanding their behavior, their habitats, their vulnerabilities. They needed to navigate vast territories without maps, finding water sources, avoiding dangers, locating resources. They needed to read weather patterns, understand ecological relationships, and make complex decisions based on constantly changing environmental information. This required an extraordinary level of sensory engagement and cognitive processing. Every day was a test of observation, memory, pattern recognition, and decision-making. The brain was constantly challenged, constantly learning, constantly adapting. Agriculture simplified this dramatically. Instead of knowing hundreds of species, you needed to know a few crops. Instead of navigating vast territories, you stayed in one place. Instead of reading the entire landscape, you watched your fields. the cognitive demands dropped drastically. And when cognitive demands drop, cognitive capabilities decline. The brain is plastic, adaptive. It develops the capacities that are used and allows unused capacities to atrophy. Within a few generations of adopting agriculture, human brains were processing less sensory information, making fewer complex environmental decisions, and relying more on routine and less on adaptation. The sensory systems that hunter-gatherers relied on became less critical for survival. You did not need exceptional night vision to work in fields during the day. You did not need acute smell to distinguish between varieties of wheat. You did not need magnetoreception when you never traveled beyond a few miles from your village. You did not need the ability to enter altered states of consciousness to communicate with animals when your animals were domesticated and confined. Generation by generation, these abilities faded. The genetic predisposition remained, but the environmental triggers that activated and developed these capacities disappeared. Consider what happened to human diet. Hunter-gatherers ate an incredibly diverse diet, consuming hundreds of different plant and animal species throughout the year. This dietary diversity provided a complete spectrum of nutrients, supported a rich gut microbiome, and kept the body in a constant state of adaptation to varied food inputs. Agricultural humans ate a narrow diet based on a few staple crops. In the Fertile Crescent, it was wheat and barley. In Asia, it was rice. In the Americas, it was maize and beans. This dietary simplification had profound consequences. The human gut contains trillions of microorganisms that are essential for digestion, immune function, and even brain function. The gut microbiome of hunter-gatherers is vastly more diverse than that of agricultural peoples. Studies of the few remaining hunter-gatherer groups show they have gut bacterial diversity that is 3 to 4 times greater than typical Western populations. This diversity is not just about digestion. The gut microbiome produces neurotransmitters, influences mood and cognition, communicates with the brain through the vagus nerve, and plays a role in everything from immune response to metabolic function. A simplified diet means a simplified microbiome, which means reduced capacity across multiple body systems. But the impact went even deeper than nutrition. Agriculture required a fundamental change in human time orientation and consciousness. Hunter-gatherers lived in the present. They responded to current conditions, made decisions based on immediate sensory information, and trusted in the abundance of the natural world to provide for future needs. They stored some food for lean times, but they did not accumulate wealth or resources beyond immediate utility. They lived in what anthropologists call immediate return economies, where effort produces immediate results. Farmers had to live for the future. They planted seeds in spring and waited months for harvest. They stored grain for the winter, saved seeds for next year's planting, planned for droughts and bad years. They developed delayed return economies, where effort today produces results months or years in the future. This shift in time orientation changed human consciousness profoundly. The present moment became less important than future outcomes. Immediate sensory experience became less relevant than planning and projection. The state of open awareness that hunter-gatherers maintained, constantly processing environmental information, gave way to a more focused, future-oriented, goal-driven consciousness. This is not necessarily bad. Future planning enabled everything we call civilization, but it came at a cost. The present moment awareness that allowed hunter-gatherers to perceive subtle environmental cues, to enter flow states while hunting, to maintain the sensory alertness that enabled their extraordinary abilities, became less practiced and less valued. Meditation traditions around the world attempt to recover this present moment awareness, recognizing it as a state of consciousness that provides access to perceptions and capabilities unavailable to the future-focused mind. What these traditions are trying to reclaim through practice is what hunter-gatherers had naturally through lifestyle. Then there were the social changes. Hunter-gatherer bands were small, typically 20 to 50 people who knew each other intimately. Leadership was fluid, based on competence in specific domains. There was no permanent hierarchy, no authority that was not constantly proven through demonstrated skill. Decisions were made through consensus. Individuals had autonomy and mobility. If you did not like the group you were with, you could leave and join another. Agriculture required larger, more organized groups. Fields needed to be defended. Labor needed to be coordinated. Surpluses needed to be managed. This required leadership structures, hierarchies, specialists who did not produce food but managed the system. It required some people to have authority over others, to command labor, to control resources. For the first time in human history, you could not just leave. Your survival was tied to the harvest, which was tied to the land, which required you to stay even if the social situation was oppressive. Freedom of movement, the ultimate insurance policy of hunter-gatherers against bad leadership or social conflict, disappeared. With permanent settlements came property, wealth accumulation, inheritance, and the concept of ownership. Hunter-gatherers owned what they could carry. Farmers owned land, structures, stored grain, animals. This created inequality, as some families accumulated more than others. It created theft, as stored resources were valuable and vulnerable. It created the need for laws, enforcement, punishment. The human brain evolved in small, egalitarian bands, where everyone knew everyone, and social cohesion was maintained through personal relationships. Suddenly, humans were living in villages of hundreds or thousands, with hierarchies, strangers, laws, and the constant stress of social inequality and competition. The psychological impact was enormous. Hunter-gatherers showed rates of anxiety, depression, and mental illness far below modern populations. Agricultural societies showed the beginning of the mental health crisis that has only intensified as civilization has advanced. But perhaps the most significant change was in humanity's relationship with the natural world. Hunter-gatherers saw themselves as part of nature, embedded in an ecological web where they were predators and prey, participants in a complex system. They had relationships with animals, plants, landscapes. They practiced reciprocity, taking what they needed and giving back through rituals and practices that maintained balance. Farmers saw nature as something to be controlled. They cleared forests, diverted water, killed predators that threatened their livestock, eliminated competing plants that interfered with their crops. Nature became the enemy, the wild chaos that had to be subdued for civilization to flourish. This psychological shift disconnected humans from the natural world in a way that had never existed before. The intimate knowledge of ecology, the sense of belonging to the landscape, the perception of other species as relatives and teachers, all of this began to fade. Nature became resource, tool, obstacle. It was no longer home. And with this disconnection came the loss of abilities that depended on feeling connected to the natural world. How can you sense the presence of animals if you see them only as meat or threat? How can you read the landscape if you see it only as potential farmland? How can you feel part of the ecological web if your entire lifestyle is based on controlling and dominating natural systems? The abilities we have been discussing, the enhanced senses, the intuitive knowing, the connection to other species, these were not standalone powers. They emerged from a way of being in the world, a mode of consciousness that saw humans as embedded in nature rather than separate from it. When that mode of consciousness disappeared, the abilities went with it. The Neolithic Revolution was not a single event. It unfolded over thousands of years, spreading from multiple centers of origin to eventually encompass most of the human species. But wherever it appeared, the pattern was the same. Populations grew, health declined, social complexity increased, individual autonomy decreased, and the extraordinary capabilities that hunter-gatherers possessed began to fade. By 5,000 years ago, the transition was largely complete in the regions where agriculture had taken hold. Humans had become civilized. We had cities, writing, mathematics, metallurgy, monumental architecture. We had kingdoms and empires and armies. We had art and literature and philosophy. And we had forgotten how to see in the dark, how to track by scent, how to navigate by feeling, how to communicate without words, how to heal through intention, how to live as fully capable human beings in direct connection with the natural world. The trade was made. We chose civilization over capability, security over power, future over present, control over connection. For most of human history, we did not even realize it was a choice. We thought we were advancing, progressing, becoming more than we had been. But the evidence suggests otherwise. We did not transcend our animal nature. We disconnected from it. We did not become superhuman. We became less than fully human. And the abilities we lost were not primitive superstitions. They were biological realities. Human potentials that atrophied when the environmental and cultural conditions that sustained them disappeared. The question now is whether those conditions can be recreated, whether those abilities can be recovered, whether humans can reclaim what was sacrificed 10,000 years ago when we planted those first seeds and decided to stay. The hidden cost of civilization. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as a testament to human achievement. 2 million stone blocks, some weighing over 70 tons, assembled with mathematical precision that we struggle to replicate even with modern technology. It is aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree. Its dimensions encode the mathematical constant pi. It has stood for 4,500 years, surviving earthquakes that destroyed structures built with modern engineering. We look at the pyramids and see the triumph of civilization. We see what humans accomplished by organizing labor, accumulating resources, developing mathematics and engineering. We see proof that abandoning the hunter-gatherer lifestyle was worth it, that the sacrifice was necessary to achieve greatness. But there is another story hidden in those stones, a story about what it cost to build them. The workers who built the pyramids were not slaves, as popular myth suggests. Archaeological evidence shows they were paid laborers, fed with meat and bread, provided with medical care and burial honors.
But examine their skeletal remains and you see the price they paid. Spinal deformities from carrying heavy loads, repetitive stress injuries in shoulders and knees, bone breaks that healed poorly, dental decay from a grain-heavy diet, shortened lifespans compared to their hunter-gatherer ancestors. These workers traded their health, their bodies, and years of their lives to stack stones into a monument for a king. And we call this progress. This is the hidden bargain at the heart of civilization. We look at the monuments, the cities, the art and literature and technology, and we see human achievement. But we do not calculate what each individual human sacrificed to create these collective accomplishments. We do not measure the cost in human capability, in health, in freedom, in the abilities that were lost. Let us be clear about what happened in the 10,000 years since agriculture began. The human body changed in ways that were not improvements. Modern humans are, on average, shorter than our Paleolithic ancestors. Hunter-gatherer remains show that men averaged around 5 feet 9 inches and women around 5 feet 5 inches. Early agricultural populations dropped to 5 feet 3 inches for men and 5 feet for women. Height has only recently recovered in wealthy nations with abundant food, and even now we have not regained the stature of our pre-agricultural ancestors. Height is not just aesthetic. It is a marker of developmental health, nutrition, and overall physical capacity. Shorter stature means our ancestors were not getting adequate nutrition during their growth years, that their bodies were stressed and struggling. Bone density decreased. Skeletal remains show that agricultural peoples had significantly weaker bones than hunter-gatherers. This is not just about osteoporosis in old age. This is about fundamental structural weakness throughout life. Weaker bones mean less support for muscle attachment, reduced capacity for physical stress, higher risk of injury. Tooth decay became epidemic. Hunter-gatherer skulls typically show minimal dental problems. Agricultural populations show rampant cavities, abscesses, tooth loss. The high-carbohydrate, grain-based diet created a perfect environment for oral bacteria. The pain and infection from dental problems would have been constant companions for most people in early agricultural societies. Infectious diseases exploded. Hunter-gatherers, living in small mobile bands, did not provide the population density necessary for epidemic diseases to establish themselves. Agricultural settlements, with hundreds or thousands of people living in close proximity, often with domesticated animals in the same spaces, became breeding grounds for pathogens. Tuberculosis, leprosy, smallpox, measles, influenza, all of these emerged in agricultural populations and killed millions. The pattern is unmistakable. Every measurable indicator of physical health declined with the adoption of agriculture. We became smaller, weaker, sicker. And this was not temporary. It persisted for thousands of years. Only in the last century, with modern medicine and abundant food in industrialized nations, have we begun to recover some of the physical health that was lost. But physical health is only part of the cost. The neurological changes were perhaps even more significant. The human brain is the most energy-expensive organ in the body. It consumes about 20% of our total energy budget, despite being only 2% of body weight. This massive energy investment only makes sense if the brain is providing critical survival advantages. For hunter-gatherers, it did. The complex sensory processing, spatial memory, social intelligence, and adaptive problem-solving required for successful hunting and gathering justified the metabolic cost.
But agricultural humans did not need the same cognitive capabilities. Farming is cognitively simpler than hunting and gathering. You do not need to maintain detailed mental maps of vast territories. You do not need to remember the locations and seasonal availability of hundreds of plant species. You do not need to track and predict animal behavior. You do not need to constantly adapt to changing environments. What you need is the ability to perform repetitive tasks, to follow seasonal schedules, to endure monotonous labor. These are not cognitively demanding capabilities. They do not require the same brain development and maintenance. Studies of brain size over the past 20,000 years show a troubling trend. The human brain has been getting smaller. We have lost about 10% of our brain volume since the end of the last ice age. This roughly corresponds with the spread of agriculture. Now, brain size is not a perfect measure of intelligence, but it is correlated with processing capacity, and a 10% reduction is significant. Some researchers argue that the reduction represents increased efficiency, that agricultural humans needed less brain capacity to survive, so the brain optimized by reducing metabolically expensive neural tissue. But this efficiency argument only makes sense if we accept that humans needed less cognitive capability, which is precisely the problem. We optimized for a simpler cognitive lifestyle. We became more efficient at being less capable. The changes were not just about overall brain size. Specific regions changed in response to agricultural life. The hippocampus, involved in spatial memory and navigation, showed reduced development in populations that stayed in one place rather than traveling vast territories. The sensory processing regions, receiving less diverse and less intense input, did not develop the same level of complexity. Meanwhile, regions associated with language, abstract thinking, and social hierarchy showed increased development. These were the capabilities needed in larger, more complex agricultural societies. We traded sensory and spatial capabilities for linguistic and social ones. This was not necessarily wrong. Language and abstract thinking are incredibly powerful tools, but they came at a cost. The bandwidth of human consciousness is limited. Energy and neural resources devoted to linguistic processing are not available for sensory processing. As we became more verbal, more analytical, more focused on abstract thought, we became less sensory, less intuitive, less connected to direct environmental perception. Indigenous peoples who maintain traditional lifestyles often show a different balance. They are less reliant on verbal communication, using words more sparingly and efficiently than civilized humans.
but they are more attuned to nonverbal communication, more aware of environmental cues, more capable of the kinds of direct perception that civilized humans have lost. This is not because they are less intelligent. It is because their cognitive resources are allocated differently, emphasizing capabilities that civilized humans have de-emphasized. Then there is the question of what happened to human consciousness itself. Hunter-gatherer cultures, when studied by anthropologists, consistently describe states of consciousness that modern humans rarely experience. They speak of becoming the animal while hunting, of dissolving the boundary between self and environment, of accessing knowledge through dreams and visions, of entering trance states where communication with non-physical entities becomes possible. Modern observers tend to interpret these descriptions as primitive superstition or metaphorical language. But what if they are literal descriptions of conscious experiences that were normal for hunter-gatherers, but are rare or absent in civilized humans? The state of consciousness required for successful hunting has been studied in the few remaining traditional hunters. It involves a diffuse, open awareness, a state where attention is not focused on any single thing, but spread across the entire field of perception. In this state, hunters report perceiving the forest or landscape as a unified whole, with every element connected and communicating. They describe knowing where animals are without seeing them, feeling the presence of prey, intuiting the right direction to move. This is not mysticism. This is a documented state of consciousness that produces practical results. Hunters in this state are measurably more successful than hunters using focused attention and analytical thinking. But this state of consciousness is incompatible with agricultural life. Farming requires focused attention, concentration on specific tasks, linear thinking about sequences of actions. The diffuse awareness of the hunter is a distraction when you are planting rows of seeds or harvesting grain. Agricultural humans learn to maintain focused consciousness, to narrow attention rather than expand it. Over generations, the ability to enter the hunting state of consciousness atrophied. It became something that required training and practice to access, rather than being the default mode of awareness. And with the loss of that state came the loss of the perceptions and capabilities it enabled. Modern meditation practices, particularly those from Buddhist and Taoist traditions, attempt to recover this open awareness. They speak of dissolving the ego, of experiencing non-duality, of perceiving the interconnection of all things. What they are describing is very similar to what hunter-gatherers describe as the normal hunting consciousness. What meditation traditions treat as an advanced spiritual attainment was once the everyday awareness of humans living in direct engagement with the natural world. The chemical changes in human biology tell another part of the story. The modern epidemic of metabolic diseases, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, all of these can be traced to the mismatch between our biology and our agricultural diet. The human body evolved to run on a diverse diet of wild plants, tubers, nuts, seeds, and occasional meat. This diet was high in fiber, high in micronutrients, moderate in protein, and low in simple carbohydrates. Blood sugar remained stable. Insulin sensitivity was maintained. Fat metabolism worked efficiently. Agricultural diets based on grain staples flipped these ratios. High in simple carbohydrates, low in fiber, deficient in many micronutrients. Blood sugar spikes and crashes. Insulin resistance develops. Fat storage increases. The metabolic machinery that worked perfectly for 200,000 years suddenly struggled with the new fuel it was being given. But the metabolic changes go deeper than diabetes and obesity. The shift in diet changed gene expression throughout the body. Genes that were active in hunter-gatherers, genes involved in sensory acuity, physical performance, and metabolic flexibility, began to be downregulated. Genes adapted for storage and survival in times of abundance. Genes that promoted fat storage and insulin resistance as protective mechanisms became more active. This is epigenetics in action. The DNA sequence did not change, but which genes were turned on and off shifted in response to the new environment. And these epigenetic changes could be passed to offspring, meaning that the children of farmers were born with gene expression patterns adapted for agricultural life, not hunter-gatherer life. Within a few generations, the biological capacity for the hunter-gatherer lifestyle was compromised.
Children born into agricultural societies were literally different at the genetic expression level from their hunter-gatherer ancestors. The pineal gland changes deserve special attention. This small endocrine gland, located deep in the center of the brain, has been called the third eye by mystical traditions around the world. Modern science has discovered that it produces melatonin, regulating sleep cycles in response to light exposure. But it may do much more. The pineal gland contains magnetite crystals and light-sensitive cells, similar to those in the retina. It responds to electromagnetic fields and may play a role in magnetoreception. Many ancient traditions speak of the pineal gland as the seat of spiritual perception, the organ that allows access to higher states of consciousness and non-ordinary forms of knowing. In modern humans, the pineal gland typically calcifies with age, accumulating calcium deposits that may interfere with its function. This calcification is accelerated by fluoride exposure, poor diet, and lack of natural light cycles. Studies show that prehistoric skulls have larger pineal gland cavities than modern skulls, suggesting that the gland was larger and possibly more active. What if the pineal gland was involved in some of the extraordinary perceptual abilities that ancient humans possessed? What if its calcification and reduced function in modern humans represents a literal closing of the third eye, a biological change that locked us out of perceptual capabilities that were once accessible? The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. Practices that are known to decalcify the pineal gland, such as specific dietary changes, sun gazing, and certain meditation techniques, are reported by practitioners to enhance intuition, improve sleep quality, and increase subjective experiences of expanded awareness. Indigenous peoples who maintain traditional lifestyles and diets show less pineal calcification than modern urban populations. Then there are the changes in human biorhythms and circadian cycles. Hunter-gatherers lived in sync with natural light cycles. They woke with the sun, were active during the day, and slept with full darkness at night. Their bodies produced melatonin on a natural schedule. Their cortisol rhythms followed the sun. Their entire endocrine system was entrained to the movement of the earth.
Agricultural humans, especially after the invention of artificial light, divorced themselves from natural cycles. We stay awake long after sunset. We sleep in rooms that are not fully dark. We work on schedules determined by social needs rather than biological rhythms. We travel across time zones, confusing our internal clocks. We expose ourselves to blue light from screens that suppresses melatonin production. The consequences go far beyond poor sleep. Disrupted circadian rhythms affect every system in the body. Immune function declines. Metabolism becomes dysregulated. Cognitive performance suffers. Mood deteriorates. And perhaps most relevant to our discussion, the altered consciousness states that occur naturally at dawn and dusk. The liminal times when the veil between worlds is thin, according to traditional knowledge, become less accessible when we are not synchronized with natural light cycles. Hunter-gatherers experienced these transition states daily. The shift from day consciousness to night consciousness and back again. These may have been windows into perceptual modes that are now closed for most modern humans who flatten their experience with artificial light and rigid schedules. We cannot discuss the cost of civilization without addressing the psychological toll. The rates of depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues in modern societies are staggering. Approximately 1 in 5 adults in developed nations experiences mental illness in any given year. Suicide rates are far higher in civilized societies than in the few remaining hunter-gatherer cultures.
This is not just about stress or modern life being difficult. This is about fundamental misalignment between human psychology and civilized living. We evolved for small group dynamics, for autonomy and mobility, for meaningful work that produces visible results, for strong social bonds and clear social roles. Civilization gives us anonymous crowds, hierarchical control, meaningless labor that produces nothing we can see or use, and shallow relationships with strangers. The psychological literature on indigenous peoples consistently shows lower rates of depression, anxiety, and existential despair. This is not because their lives are easier. Many traditional peoples face food scarcity, high infant mortality, and physical dangers that civilized humans are insulated from. But they have purpose, community, autonomy, and connection to something larger than themselves. These are not luxuries. These are psychological needs that hunter-gatherer life fulfilled naturally, and that civilized life systematically undermines. The cost of civilization is measured not just in what we gained, but in what we lost. We gained cities and lost connection to nature. We gained technology and lost biological capability. We gained security and lost freedom. We gained knowledge and lost wisdom. We gained complexity and lost wholeness. Every human alive today carries these losses in their body and brain. We are the inheritors of 10,000 years of adaptation to a lifestyle we were not designed for. We are hunter-gatherers trying to function in an agricultural world that has become an industrial world that is becoming a digital world. Each transition takes us further from our evolutionary context and diminishes more of our natural capabilities. But loss implies that something still exists to be recovered. The abilities did not disappear from the human genome. They were suppressed, covered over, made dormant by environmental conditions that no longer triggered their development. Change those conditions and the abilities can resurface. This is not theoretical.
This is happening now in individuals and communities around the world who are rediscovering what it means to be fully human. The pineal gland connection. In 1640, the French philosopher René Descartes made a curious claim. He proposed that the pineal gland, a tiny pine cone-shaped organ buried deep in the center of the brain, was the seat of the soul. It was, he argued, the point where the immaterial mind interacted with the material body, where consciousness itself resided. Modern science dismissed this as philosophical speculation, the kind of mystical thinking that belonged to a pre-scientific age. The pineal gland, science determined, was simply an endocrine organ that produced melatonin to regulate sleep cycles. Nothing mystical about it. Nothing particularly interesting. But Descartes was not the first to recognize something special about the pineal gland. He was actually thousands of years late to the conversation. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs show the Eye of Horus, a symbol that bears striking anatomical resemblance to a cross-section of the brain with the pineal gland at its center. The symbol represented protection, health, and restoration, but also inner vision and higher perception. The Egyptians called it the eye that sees the invisible. Hindu tradition speaks of the Ajna chakra, the third eye, located in the center of the forehead, corresponding to the location of the pineal gland. Activating this chakra was said to grant intuition, clairvoyance, and access to higher states of consciousness. The practice of meditation was, in large part, about stimulating this internal eye. Buddhist texts describe the urna, a protuberance between the eyebrows of the Buddha, representing his awakened state and his ability to perceive reality beyond the limitations of ordinary senses. Again, this corresponds to the pineal gland location. The ancient Greeks called it the Eye of Wisdom. Taoist alchemy focused on opening the crystal palace, their term for activating the pineal gland through specific breathing and meditation practices. Indigenous shamanic traditions from the Amazon to Siberia speak of an organ of vision in the center of the head that must be awakened to see spirits and access non-ordinary reality. Every major mystical and spiritual tradition, developed independently across thousands of years and thousands of miles, identified this same organ as crucial for expanded perception and higher consciousness. They could not have known about neurotransmitters or endocrine function. They could not have performed dissections or biochemical analyses. Yet they all arrived at the same conclusion through direct experience. The pineal gland is the biological basis for abilities beyond ordinary human perception. Modern science is finally catching up, and what it is discovering is remarkable. The pineal gland is not just an endocrine organ. It is one of the most complex and unusual structures in the human body. It contains photoreceptor cells similar to those in the retina, despite being buried deep in the brain with no direct access to light. It contains magnetite crystals, making it sensitive to electromagnetic fields. It produces not just melatonin, but also dimethyltryptamine, DMT, one of the most powerful psychedelic compounds known. Let that sink in. Your brain naturally produces DMT, a substance that when consumed externally produces experiences of other dimensions, communication with entities, dissolution of ego boundaries, and perceptions that seem to transcend physical reality. The pineal gland synthesizes this compound as part of its normal function. Why would the human brain produce a powerful psychedelic? What evolutionary purpose could this possibly serve? The conventional answer is that DMT production is minimal, occurring only in trace amounts, probably with no significant function. It is treated as a biological curiosity, an interesting footnote in neuroscience textbooks, but nothing more. But research by Dr. Rick Strassman and others suggests the pineal gland may produce substantial quantities of DMT during specific circumstances: birth, death, near-death experiences, and possibly during deep meditation or extreme stress. These are precisely the moments when humans report experiences of expanded consciousness, out-of-body states, encounters with non-physical entities, and access to information that should not be accessible through ordinary perception. What if DMT is not a bug, but a feature? What if the pineal gland's production of this compound is meant to give humans access to perceptual states beyond ordinary consciousness? What if ancient humans, with larger and more active pineal glands, had more frequent or more controllable access to these states? The evidence suggests that the pineal gland has been systematically compromised in modern humans through a combination of environmental factors and lifestyle changes. First, there is calcification. The pineal gland in modern adults is typically heavily calcified, filled with calcium phosphate deposits that form crystalline structures within the tissue. This calcification increases with age and is virtually universal in industrialized populations by middle age. But it is not inevitable. Studies of non-industrialized populations show significantly less calcification, and prehistoric skulls show pineal gland cavities that are larger than modern ones, suggesting less calcification and possibly greater overall size. What causes calcification? The primary culprit appears to be fluoride. Fluoride, added to water supplies and dental products throughout the developed world, accumulates preferentially in the pineal gland at higher concentrations than anywhere else in the body. Research has shown that fluoride exposure corresponds directly with increased pineal calcification. The very substance we add to water to prevent tooth decay may be calcifying the organ that ancient traditions considered the seat of higher consciousness. But fluoride is not the only factor. Poor diet, particularly one lacking in key nutrients like vitamin K2 and magnesium, promotes calcification throughout the body, including the pineal gland. Lack of exposure to natural light cycles disrupts pineal function. Electromagnetic pollution from Wi-Fi, cell phones, and electrical devices may interfere with the gland's electromagnetic sensitivity. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, which suppresses pineal activity. Modern life, in other words, is perfectly designed to compromise pineal gland function, and the consequences may extend far beyond disrupted sleep cycles. Consider what happens when the pineal gland is functioning optimally. Research subjects who have undertaken protocols to decalcify their pineal glands report consistent changes. Enhanced dream recall, more vivid and lucid dreams, increased intuition, better meditation depth, feelings of expanded awareness, and in some cases, spontaneous experiences of what they describe as psychic perception or communication with non-physical entities. These reports are dismissed by mainstream science as placebo effects or wishful thinking. But the consistency of the reports across hundreds of individuals who have no contact with each other suggests something real is occurring. When you remove the interference, when you restore the pineal gland to better function, perceptual capabilities emerge that are not normally present. Indigenous peoples who maintain traditional diets and lifestyles, who are not exposed to fluoride or electromagnetic pollution, who live in sync with natural light cycles, demonstrate abilities that may be related to healthier pineal function.
The shamanic ability to enter trance states and access non-ordinary reality. The intuitive knowing that guides hunters to prey they cannot see. The precognitive dreams that warn of danger. All of these may be related to having pineal glands that function as they were designed to function. The pineal gland is also intimately connected to the rest of the endocrine system. It communicates with the pituitary gland, the hypothalamus, and the entire hormonal network that regulates everything from metabolism to mood to reproductive function. When the pineal is compromised, the entire system is affected. There is evidence that healthy pineal function promotes better overall endocrine balance, which in turn supports physical health, mental clarity, and emotional stability. The pineal gland may be a master regulator, a conductor, coordinating the symphony of hormones and neurotransmitters that determine how we feel and function. But the most intriguing aspect of the pineal gland is its potential role in magnetoreception, the ability to sense magnetic fields. The magnetite crystals in the pineal gland are identical in structure to the magnetite found in migratory birds and sea turtles, animals that use Earth's magnetic field for navigation. The positioning of the pineal gland, deep in the center of the brain, protected from external electromagnetic interference, makes it an ideal location for a biological compass. Research has shown that humans can unconsciously detect changes in magnetic fields. Subjects in experiments respond to magnetic field rotations with measurable brain activity, even though they report no conscious awareness of the field. The pineal gland is the likely sensor for this perception, but in modern humans, the sense remains unconscious, not accessible to deliberate use. In ancient humans, with larger and more active pineal glands, this magnetic sense may have been conscious and refined. They may have been able to feel direction, to sense their orientation relative to the Earth's field, to navigate using an internal compass that we have lost access to. The Viking rune path, the Aboriginal songlines, the Polynesian wayfinding, all of these may have involved conscious use of magnetoreception, mediated by the pineal gland. The pineal gland also appears to play a role in regulating consciousness states. Melatonin production, its primary known function, does more than just promote sleep. Melatonin is a powerful antioxidant that protects brain tissue. It modulates neurotransmitter activity throughout the brain, and the timing of its release determines not just when we sleep, but what kind of consciousness we experience during waking hours. When melatonin rhythms are disrupted, as they are in most modern humans due to artificial light and irregular schedules, consciousness becomes less fluid. We lose access to the transitional states between waking and sleeping, the hypnagogic and hypnopompic states where vivid imagery, creative insight, and intuitive knowing often emerge. We lose the natural altered states that occur at dawn and dusk, when melatonin levels are shifting. Hunter-gatherers, living in sync with natural light cycles, experienced these transitional states daily. They were opportunities for the kinds of non-ordinary perception that many spiritual traditions deliberately cultivate through practice. Modern humans, with our disrupted melatonin rhythms, have far less access to these states. But the pineal gland's production of DMT adds another dimension to this picture. If the pineal gland can produce significant quantities of DMT during specific circumstances, and if this production is modulated by the gland's overall health and activity level, then ancient humans with healthier pineal glands may have had more frequent access to DMT-mediated states of consciousness. This would explain the universal presence of shamanic traditions in pre-agricultural societies. Shamans are individuals who can reliably enter altered states where they claim to perceive other dimensions, communicate with spirits, retrieve information from non-ordinary sources, and perform healing through non-physical means. If their pineal glands were producing more DMT, either spontaneously or through techniques that stimulated production, their experiences would be exactly what they describe. And if pineal function was generally better in ancient populations, then shamanic abilities may not have been rare gifts possessed by a few individuals, but rather enhanced versions of capabilities that everyone had to some degree. The shaman was not a person with a fundamentally different biology, but someone who had developed and refined abilities that were latent in everyone. Modern research into DMT experiences has revealed consistent patterns. Users report encountering intelligent entities, often described as beings made of light or geometric patterns. They report receiving information or teachings from these entities. They report experiencing themselves as consciousness independent of their physical body. They report perceiving reality as fundamentally interconnected, with all things part of a unified conscious field. These experiences are remarkably similar to descriptions from shamanic traditions, mystical states described in religious texts, and the kinds of expanded perception that hunter-gatherers describe accessing during certain activities. What if these are not hallucinations or delusions, but actual perceptual states that humans can access when the pineal gland is functioning properly and producing the neurochemistry required for expanded consciousness? Science cannot yet answer this question definitively. The nature of consciousness itself remains poorly understood. Whether DMT experiences represent access to real, non-physical dimensions, or are simply unusual brain states produced by altered neurochemistry, is still debated. But what is clear is that the pineal gland is a gateway to these states, and that modern humans have, through environmental and lifestyle factors, largely closed this gateway. The implications are profound. If ancient humans had regular access to expanded states of consciousness through better pineal function, then their perception of reality would have been fundamentally different from ours. They would not have experienced the hard separation between physical and spiritual, between ordinary and non-ordinary, between self and other that characterizes modern consciousness. They would have lived in a more fluid, more interconnected, more magical world. And the abilities we have been discussing, the enhanced senses, the intuitive knowing, the connection to nature and animals, these may all be related to this expanded consciousness. When you perceive reality as a unified field of consciousness, when you experience yourself as part of that field rather than separate from it, abilities that seem paranormal from a materialist perspective become natural expressions of that interconnected awareness. The pineal gland may be the biological key to these abilities. It is the physical structure that, when functioning optimally, allows consciousness to expand beyond its ordinary boundaries. And it is the structure that has been most compromised by civilization, systematically calcified and suppressed by the very lifestyle we have created. But here is the critical point. The pineal gland can be restored. Calcification can be reversed. Function can be recovered. The gateway that has been closed can be opened again. Protocols for pineal decalcification have been developed and tested by thousands of individuals. They involve removing fluoride from water and dental products, consuming foods rich in specific nutrients that support pineal health, practicing meditation and breathing techniques that stimulate the gland, and exposing oneself to natural light cycles that restore proper melatonin rhythms. People who follow these protocols consistently report changes in their consciousness and perception. They describe better sleep, more vivid dreams, enhanced intuition, and in many cases, the spontaneous emergence of abilities they did not previously possess. The pineal gland responds when given the right conditions, and when it does, human consciousness and capability expand. This is not New Age wishful thinking. This is biology responding to environmental inputs, the same way that muscles grow when exercised or lungs expand when trained at altitude. The pineal gland is plastic, responsive, capable of regeneration and enhanced function when the obstacles to its function are removed. Ancient humans did not need protocols or practices to maintain pineal health. Their lifestyle naturally provided the conditions for optimal function. They drank pure water without fluoride. They ate diverse wild diets rich in the nutrients the pineal requires. They lived in natural light cycles. They were not exposed to electromagnetic pollution. Their pineal glands functioned as they were designed to function, and as a result, they had access to perceptual capabilities and consciousness states that most modern humans never experience. The third eye is not a metaphor. It is a biological reality, and it has been systematically blinded by 10,000 years of civilization. But it can see again if we create the conditions for its awakening. The pineal gland is the bridge between the physical and non-physical, between ordinary and expanded consciousness, between the limited self and the interconnected awareness that ancient humans experienced as normal. It is the organ that, when functioning properly, allows humans to access the full spectrum of their perceptual and cognitive capabilities. We have identified the mechanism. We understand the problem. The question now is whether we have the will to implement the solution, to make the changes necessary to restore the pineal gland and reclaim the consciousness and abilities that were lost. The genetic lock. In 2003, the Human Genome Project announced a discovery that shocked the scientific community. After mapping all 3 billion base pairs in human DNA, they found that only about 2% of our genome actually codes for proteins, the building blocks of biological function. The remaining 98% appeared to do nothing at all. Scientists called it junk DNA, evolutionary debris accumulated over millions of years of mutations and genetic drift. It was, they assumed, simply biological clutter that the body carried along with no functional purpose. They were catastrophically wrong. We now know that so-called junk DNA is not junk at all. It is a massive regulatory system, a library of genetic switches, enhancers, and control sequences that determine which genes get turned on and off, when they activate, and how strongly they express. This regulatory DNA is what makes us human rather than chimpanzees, despite sharing over 98% of our protein-coding genes. It is what allows a single genome to create hundreds of different cell types. And it is what determines whether the extraordinary capabilities we have been discussing are expressed or remain dormant. The human genome contains the instructions for abilities we no longer use. The genes are there, preserved across hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, maintained because they provided survival advantages to our ancestors. But having the genes is not enough. They must be activated,
turned on by the right environmental and epigenetic signals.
And for most of these abilities, modern life does not provide those signals. This is the genetic lock. We carry the potential for extraordinary capabilities in every cell of our bodies, but that potential is locked behind layers of genetic regulation that respond to environmental inputs we no longer experience. Consider the genetics of sensory capability. The human genome contains the full complement of genes for highly developed olfactory receptors, far more than we actually use. We have about 400 functional olfactory receptor genes, but many of them are expressed at very low levels or not at all in most modern humans. Studies of different populations show that gene expression patterns for olfactory receptors vary significantly based on environment and lifestyle. Indigenous peoples who rely heavily on scent for hunting and gathering show higher expression of these receptor genes. Their DNA is the same as urban humans, but the regulatory switches are set differently, turning on more of the sensory capability that exists in the genome. This is not genetic difference in the traditional sense. This is epigenetic difference, the same genes responding differently to different environmental inputs. The same pattern appears for visual acuity genes, auditory processing genes, proprioception and balance genes. The hardware is in the genome, universal to all humans, but the software settings, determined by epigenetic factors, vary dramatically based on how the body is used and what demands are placed on it. Even more striking is what we are learning about genes related to metabolic flexibility, physical performance, and longevity. Ancient DNA extracted from prehistoric human remains shows that our ancestors had certain genes expressed at higher levels than modern humans. Genes related to mitochondrial function, cellular repair, inflammatory response, all show different expression patterns in ancient versus modern humans. This makes sense. Ancient humans faced physical challenges that required extraordinary metabolic capacity. They needed to run long distances, endure temperature extremes, heal rapidly from injuries, and maintain physical function throughout their lifespan. Their bodies expressed the full capacity of their metabolic genes to meet these demands. Modern humans, living sedentary lives with abundant food and controlled temperatures, do not send the same signals to their genome. The metabolic genes remain in the DNA, but they are not activated to the same degree. We have the genetic capacity for the physical capabilities of our ancestors, but we do not express that capacity because we do not need to for survival. This is where epigenetics becomes crucial. Epigenetic modifications are chemical tags attached to DNA, or to the histone proteins that DNA wraps around. These modifications do not change the DNA sequence itself, but they control whether genes are accessible to be read and transcribed into proteins. They are the switches that turn genes on and off. What determines epigenetic patterns? Environment, behavior, stress, diet, toxin exposure, even thoughts and emotions. The epigenome is responsive, constantly adjusting gene expression in response to what the body experiences. And critically, some epigenetic modifications can be inherited, passed from parents to children, allowing environmental adaptations to be transmitted across generations without changing the underlying DNA.
This is how the transition from hunter-gatherer to agricultural life could happen so rapidly in evolutionary terms. The DNA did not need to change. The epigenetic settings changed in response to the new environment, turning down genes that were no longer necessary and turning up genes that supported agricultural life. Within a few generations, children were born with epigenetic patterns adapted to farming, not hunting and gathering. The abilities were not lost from the genome.
They were switched off through epigenetic modification. The genes for enhanced night vision are still there. The genes for acute olfactory tracking are still there. The genes for magnetoreception are still there. But the epigenetic switches are set to off, and they remain off because modern life does not provide the environmental triggers to turn them back on. Here is where it gets interesting. Epigenetic modifications are reversible. The switches that were turned off can be turned back on if the right conditions are created. This is not theoretical. This is observed in research on epigenetic reprogramming, where specific interventions change gene expression patterns and restore capabilities that were dormant. Studies on fasting, for example, have shown that it triggers widespread epigenetic changes, activating genes related to cellular repair, metabolic flexibility, and stress resistance. These are ancient genetic programs, evolved to help humans survive periods of food scarcity. Modern humans, eating constantly, never activate these programs. But when fasting is practiced, even intermittently, the genes turn back on and capabilities return. Cold exposure does something similar. Humans evolved in environments with significant temperature variation. We had to maintain core body temperature while exposed to cold that would quickly kill someone who was not adapted. This required extraordinary metabolic capacity, particularly in brown adipose tissue, a special type of fat that generates heat. Modern humans living in climate-controlled environments have very little active brown adipose tissue. The genes are there, but they are not expressed. But when modern humans exposed themselves to cold regularly, something remarkable happens. Brown adipose tissue activates and expands. Metabolic heat generation increases. Cold tolerance improves dramatically. The genetic capacity was always there, dormant, waiting for the environmental signal to activate it. The same principle applies to physical training. When muscles are stressed through exercise, especially novel or intense exercise, genetic programs for strength, endurance, and tissue repair activate. The body reads the environmental signal that says physical capability is needed, and it turns on the genes required to build that capability. But modern exercise is limited in scope compared to the physical demands ancient humans faced. We go to the gym for an hour, then sit for the rest of the day. We specialize, training specific movement patterns while ignoring others. We do not climb, crawl, jump, throw, carry heavy loads over distance, navigate rough terrain, or engage in the full spectrum of movement that was daily life for hunter-gatherers. As a result, we activate only a fraction of our movement-related genes. The genetic programs for complete physical capability remain mostly dormant, expressed just enough to handle our limited movement demands, but not enough to restore the full capacity we are designed for. The genetic lock extends to cognitive and sensory abilities as well. Neuroplasticity research has shown that the brain can reorganize itself throughout life, growing new neural connections,
strengthening pathways that are used, and pruning those that are not. This is genetic expression in action. Genes related to neural growth, synaptic plasticity, and neurotransmitter production respond to how the brain is used. When blind individuals learn to echolocate, clicking their tongues and using the returning sound to navigate, brain scans show that their visual cortex repurposes itself for auditory processing. The genetic programs for sensory processing are flexible, responding to demand. The same genome that would have created visual processing creates auditory processing when that is what survival requires. What if ancient humans, using their senses far more intensely and in more varied ways than modern humans, had genetic expression patterns that supported sensory capabilities we can barely imagine? What if the genes for those capabilities are still in our genome, waiting for the environmental input that tells them they are needed again? Research on indigenous peoples provides clues. Studies comparing the genomes of traditional hunter-gatherers to agricultural populations show that the DNA sequence is virtually identical. There are a few genetic variants that differ in frequency between populations, related to things like lactose tolerance or high-altitude adaptation, but these are minor. The major differences are epigenetic. Hunter-gatherers show different methylation patterns on their DNA, different histone modifications, different gene expression profiles. The same genome is being read differently, resulting in different physical and cognitive capabilities. And when indigenous children are raised in modern environments, their epigenetic patterns shift within one generation to more closely resemble those of the modern population. The genetic potential remains, but the expression pattern changes in response to the new environment. This is simultaneously depressing and hopeful. Depressing because it shows how quickly human capability can be suppressed when environmental demands change. One generation is enough to shift epigenetic patterns significantly. 10,000 years of agricultural life, 400 generations, has been more than enough to lock down most of the genetic programs for extraordinary human capability. But it is hopeful because it means the lock can be picked. If epigenetic patterns respond to environment within a single generation, then it is possible to restore ancestral gene expression patterns by recreating ancestral environmental conditions, or at least the key elements of those conditions. We are beginning to understand what those key elements are. Physical challenge that engages the full spectrum of human movement capability. Sensory challenge that requires acute perception and constant environmental awareness. Metabolic challenge from periods of fasting and exposure to temperature extremes. Social challenge from complex interpersonal dynamics in small group settings. And perhaps most importantly, time spent in natural environments with the full complexity and unpredictability that implies. These are the environmental inputs that tell the genome to express human capability fully. These are the conditions that turn on the genes for extraordinary sensory acuity, physical performance, cognitive flexibility, and the expanded consciousness that ancient humans experienced as normal. Modern research into ancestral health and evolutionary biology is rediscovering these principles. The paleo movement, despite its commercial excesses and oversimplifications, is based on a valid insight. Human biology is adapted for conditions that no longer exist in modern life, and recreating some of those conditions restores function that has been lost. But the implications go far beyond diet and exercise. The genetic lock on human capability can be released through systematic exposure to the environmental conditions that ancient humans experienced. This is not about going back to living in caves. This is about understanding what signals the genome needs to express its full potential, and finding ways to provide those signals within a modern context. Some individuals and communities are already doing this. They are practicing movement patterns that engage neglected genetic programs. They are exposing themselves to cold and heat in ways that activate metabolic genes. They are spending time in wilderness environments that challenge their sensory and cognitive systems. They are experimenting with fasting protocols that turn on genetic programs for cellular repair and metabolic flexibility. And they are reporting results that go beyond improved fitness or health metrics. They report enhanced sensory perception, improved intuition, better cognitive function, and in some cases, the emergence of abilities they did not previously possess. Their genes are responding to environmental inputs, expressing capabilities that were locked down, dormant, waiting. The human genome is not fixed in its expression. It is responsive, plastic, capable of dramatic reorganization when conditions demand it. We carry within us the genetic instructions for everything our ancestors could do. Those instructions have not been deleted. They have been silenced, turned off by 10,000 years of life that did not require them. But silence can be broken. Genes that have been turned off can be turned back on. The genetic lock that keeps us smaller, weaker, less capable than our ancestors, is not permanent. It is a response to environment, and it can be reversed through environmental change. This is not about genetic engineering or biotechnology. This is about providing the body with the conditions it needs to express the genetic potential that is already present. The capabilities we have lost are not gone. They are sleeping, and they can be awakened. The question is whether we are willing to create the conditions for that awakening, whether we are willing to challenge our bodies and minds in ways that modern life does not require, whether we are willing to step outside the comfortable, controlled, simplified existence that civilization provides, and expose ourselves to the complexity and challenge that our genes are waiting for. Because the genetic lock will only open in response to the right key. And that key is not a pill or a technology or a hack. It is a way of living that most modern humans have never experienced. It is reconnection with the environmental conditions that shaped us. It is the willingness to be uncomfortable, challenged, pushed beyond the narrow range of experience that constitutes normal modern life. The genome knows what humans are capable of. It has preserved that information across hundreds of thousands of years. But it will only express that capability when it receives the signal that such expression is necessary for survival. Our task is to send that signal, to convince our genes that we need the full spectrum of human ability, not just the limited subset required to navigate modern civilization. This is the challenge of genetic unlocking, not changing the DNA, but changing the conditions that determine how that DNA is read. Not engineering new capabilities, but recovering ancient ones. Not becoming more than human, but becoming fully human again.
Modern survivors. People who still have it. In the highlands of Nepal, there lives a man named Wim Hof, who should not be alive. He has climbed Mount Everest wearing nothing but shorts. He has run a half-marathon above the Arctic Circle, barefoot, in temperatures that would cause frostbite in minutes for normal humans. He has sat immersed in ice for nearly 2 hours without his core body temperature dropping. He has injected himself with endotoxin, a bacterial component that causes severe flu-like symptoms in everyone, and, through conscious control, suppressed his immune inflammatory response to the point where he experienced no symptoms at all. Scientists initially dismissed him as a genetic freak, a 1-in-a-million outlier whose abilities could not be replicated. Then he trained 12 volunteers using his methods, and within 10 days, they could control their autonomic nervous systems and immune responses in ways that medical science insisted were impossible. The research was published in peer-reviewed journals. The results were undeniable. Wim Hof had not been born with special abilities. He had reactivated abilities that all humans possess, but have forgotten how to access. His methods are deceptively simple. Specific breathing techniques, gradual cold exposure, and mental focus. These are not new inventions. They are ancient practices, found in Tibetan Tummo meditation, Himalayan yoga, and indigenous cold adaptation techniques. Wim Hof simply systematized them and proved to modern science that they work. What he demonstrated is that human physiology is far more controllable than we have been taught. The autonomic nervous system, supposedly beyond conscious control, can be influenced through specific practices. Body temperature, heart rate, inflammatory response, pain perception. All of these can be modulated through techniques that ancient humans likely used as standard practice. Wim Hof is not alone. Around the world, there are individuals and communities who have retained or recovered abilities that mainstream science considers impossible. The Bajau people of Southeast Asia spend up to 60% of their working day underwater, freediving to depths of 70 meters without any equipment. Studies have shown they have spleens 50% larger than related land-dwelling populations. The spleen stores oxygenated red blood cells, releasing them during dives to extend breath-holding time. But this is not just genetic adaptation. Land-dwelling individuals who train intensively in freediving develop similar splenic responses. The capability is latent in all humans, activated by environmental demand. The Bajau can see clearly underwater without goggles, adjusting their eye lens shape consciously. They can slow their heart rate dramatically during dives, conserving oxygen. They can remain submerged for over 5 minutes on a single breath. These are abilities that modern science would have declared impossible. Yet they are documented, measured, and reproducible. What makes the Bajau extraordinary is not their genetics. It is their lifestyle. They have maintained environmental pressures that activate genetic programs most humans no longer express. They prove that the capabilities are there, waiting for the right conditions to manifest. In the Himalayan mountains, Tibetan monks practice Tummo meditation, generating enough internal heat to dry wet sheets wrapped around their bodies while sitting naked in freezing temperatures. This has been documented by researchers, measured with thermal imaging, and verified through multiple independent studies. The monks are not cheating. They are not using external heat sources. They are generating heat metabolically,
through conscious control of their physiology. The technique involves specific breathing patterns, visualization, and meditative focus. It activates brown adipose tissue, increases metabolic rate, and directs blood flow to the skin surface. These are all things the body can do naturally, but most modern humans never learn to control consciously. The Tibetan monks have preserved knowledge and practices that allow deliberate activation of these systems. Researchers studying the monks found that their meditation practice produces measurable changes in brain activity, immune function, and gene expression. After intensive meditation retreats, practitioners show different epigenetic patterns than non-practitioners. They are literally changing which genes are active through mental practice, combined with physical discipline. In the Australian outback, Aboriginal trackers demonstrate perceptual abilities that seem superhuman to Western observers. They can follow tracks that are invisible to trained non-Aboriginal trackers, identifying individual animals, determining their speed and direction, and predicting where the animal will go next. When tested, their visual acuity is no better than average. What differs is how they process visual information and what they perceive as relevant.
Aboriginal trackers describe entering a state of consciousness where they become the animal, feeling what it feels, thinking what it thinks. From this state, tracking becomes intuitive. They do not consciously analyze footprints. They know where the animal went because they are connected to it at some level that Western science cannot explain, but that produces measurably superior tracking results. This is not mystical nonsense. This is documented in peer-reviewed anthropological research. Aboriginal trackers can find people lost in the desert when search and rescue teams with helicopters and GPS fail. Their ability is real, practical, and reproducible within their cultural context. What they have retained is the hunter consciousness that we discussed earlier, the diffuse awareness that allows perception beyond ordinary sensory processing. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous shamans work with plant medicines in ways that continue to baffle Western scientists. They can identify medicinal plants and their uses without any apparent trial and error process. When asked how they know, they say the plants tell them. Western researchers dismissed this as primitive metaphor until they started testing the plant combinations and found that many of them are pharmacologically sophisticated, combining compounds in ways that enhance effects or reduce toxicity. The shamans are accessing information through means we do not understand. Whether they are perceiving chemical signatures, intuiting effects through some form of direct knowing, or actually communicating with plant intelligence as they claim, the results are undeniable. They possess knowledge that should require advanced laboratory analysis to discover, yet they obtain it through direct experience in altered states of consciousness. Studies of ayahuasca, one of the primary plant medicines used in Amazonian shamanism, have shown it produces profound changes in brain function. Neural networks that normally do not communicate begin exchanging information. The default mode network, associated with ego and self-referential thinking, becomes less active. Perception expands beyond normal boundaries. Users consistently report experiences of accessing information they could not have known through ordinary means. Whether these experiences represent actual perception of non-physical information or simply unusual brain states that allow integration of subconscious knowledge, the practical outcome is the same.
capabilities emerge that are not present in ordinary consciousness. The shamans have maintained practices that reliably access these states and the abilities they enable. In modern contexts, there are individuals who have spontaneously developed or recovered extraordinary abilities, often following near-death experiences, severe illnesses, or intensive spiritual practices. Daniel Kish, blind from infancy, developed echolocation to such a degree that he can ride a bicycle through traffic, hike mountain trails, and navigate complex environments using only the clicks of his tongue and the returning echoes. Brain scans show his visual cortex has repurposed itself for auditory spatial processing. He is using the same neural hardware that would process vision to create a spatial map from sound. Kish is not unique. He has taught his techniques to hundreds of blind individuals, many of whom develop functional echolocation within months of training. The capability is not a miracle. It is neuroplasticity in action. The brain adapting to use available sensory information in new ways. What makes Kish remarkable is not that he can echolocate, but that he proves the human brain is capable of sensory transformations that we typically assume are impossible. Stephen Wiltshire, an autistic savant, can draw perfect architectural renderings of entire cityscapes after a single helicopter ride. He sees a city for 20 minutes and can then reproduce it in accurate detail, including the correct number of windows in each building, the proper proportions of every structure, the precise layout of streets and landmarks. His visual memory and spatial processing are functioning at a level that most humans never approach. But here is the important point. Stephen Wiltshire is not a different species. His brain is organized differently, emphasizing certain capabilities while de-emphasizing others, but the raw processing power he demonstrates is within the range of human possibility. His abilities show what human perception and memory can achieve when genetic and neurological factors align in unusual ways. Indigenous peoples around the world continue to demonstrate abilities that civilization has lost. The Inuit can navigate featureless Arctic landscapes using subtle cues from snow patterns, wind direction, and their internal sense of direction. The Polynesian navigators can cross thousands of miles of open ocean without instruments, reading wave patterns, star positions, and the behavior of seabirds to maintain course. The San Bushmen can track animals for days across hard ground, where modern trackers see no evidence of passage. These are not superhuman abilities. These are human abilities being used at full capacity, developed through cultural knowledge, intensive training from childhood, and constant practical application. The people who possess them do not consider themselves extraordinary. They consider these skills normal, practical necessities for survival in their environments. What makes them remarkable to civilized observers is not that they can do things we cannot, but that they remind us of what we have lost. They are living proof that the abilities we have been discussing are not theoretical or historical. They exist right now in people who have maintained the practices and environmental conditions that keep those abilities active.
There are also modern individuals who have deliberately set out to recover lost abilities through experimental practice and lifestyle modification. These are not indigenous peoples maintaining traditional ways.
These are people from modern, civilized backgrounds who have recognized what has been lost and are working to reclaim it. Erwan Lecour developed MoveNat, a system of natural movement based on ancestral movement patterns. Practitioners train in outdoor environments, climbing, jumping, crawling, balancing, lifting, carrying, throwing, swimming. The goal is to restore the full movement vocabulary that humans evolved to use. Participants consistently report not just improved fitness, but enhanced body awareness, better proprioception, increased confidence in their physical capabilities, and a sense of reconnection with their bodies that they did not know was missing. This is genetic unlocking in action. By providing the environmental input of complex, varied movement in natural settings, practitioners are activating genetic programs that have been dormant. Their bodies respond by developing capabilities that gym training alone does not produce. Rick Rubin, the music producer, spent years studying with Tibetan monks and indigenous teachers, learning meditation and consciousness practices. He describes developing enhanced perception of subtle energies, intuitive knowing that guides his creative decisions, and access to states of flow where extraordinary work emerges effortlessly. These are not mystical claims. They are descriptions of cognitive and perceptual abilities that emerge when consciousness is trained through specific practices. In the biohacking community, individuals experiment with protocols designed to optimize human performance and activate latent capabilities. They practice intermittent fasting to trigger metabolic flexibility. They expose themselves to cold to activate brown adipose tissue and stress resistance. They use meditation and breathwork to enhance cognitive function. They eliminate toxins like fluoride to restore pineal gland function. They spend time in nature to reset circadian rhythms and reduce chronic stress. Many of these practitioners report results that go beyond the physical improvements they were seeking. They describe enhanced sensory perception, better intuition, improved creativity, and occasional experiences of expanded consciousness or anomalous knowing. They are, often without realizing it, recreating some of the environmental conditions that ancient humans experienced naturally, and their biology is responding by expressing capabilities that were locked down. The scientific research on these practices is still limited, but what exists is promising. Studies on meditation show measurable changes in brain structure, immune function, and gene expression. Research on fasting demonstrates activation of cellular repair mechanisms and metabolic flexibility. Cold exposure studies show dramatic improvements in brown fat activity, mitochondrial function, and stress resilience. Forest bathing research reveals measurable reductions in cortisol, improvements in immune markers, and enhanced parasympathetic nervous system activity. Each of these interventions is triggering biological responses that were normal for ancient humans, but are rare in modern populations. The capabilities they restore are not new. They are recovery of function that was suppressed by modern lifestyle. What all these examples share is a common thread. Human capability is not fixed. It is responsive to conditions. Provide the right environmental inputs, the right practices, the right challenges, and abilities emerge that were not previously present. Remove the obstacles that modern life creates, and functions that were suppressed begin to restore themselves. The people who still possess extraordinary abilities, whether indigenous peoples maintaining traditional ways
or modern individuals deliberately recovering lost capacities, are not genetically different from the rest of us. They are simply expressing more of what is possible for humans. They are proof that the genetic lock can be opened, that the abilities we have been discussing throughout this exploration are real, present, and recoverable. They are the survivors, the ones who kept the flame alive, while the rest of humanity forgot what it means to be fully human. And they are showing us the way back, demonstrating through their existence and their achievements that we can reclaim what was lost. The question is no longer whether it is possible to recover these abilities. The question is whether we are willing to do what it takes, whether we are willing to step outside the comfortable prison of modern life and expose ourselves to the challenges, the discomfort, and the radical lifestyle changes that awakening these capabilities requires. Because the survivors are not just showing us what is possible, they are showing us what is necessary. And the path they illuminate is not easy, not convenient, not compatible with the way most modern humans choose to live. But it is the path home, back to full human capability, back to the abilities our ancestors possessed, back to what we were always meant to be. The suppression. In 1995, the CIA declassified a trove of documents related to a program called Stargate. For over 20 years, the United States military had been researching and developing remote viewing, the ability to perceive locations, objects, and events at a distance, using only the mind. The program had cost over $20 million. It had employed dozens of viewers, and according to the declassified reports, it had produced actionable intelligence that was used in military and espionage operations. Then it was shut down. The official reason given was that the results were too inconsistent to be reliable. But buried in the declassified documents are reports of successful operations, accurate descriptions of secret installations, correct predictions of events that had not yet occurred. The program worked. Not perfectly, not every time, but well enough that it continued for 2 decades with military funding. So why was it really shut down? And why, despite documented success, does mainstream science still insist that remote viewing is impossible? The answer reveals a pattern of suppression that extends far beyond one government program. It reveals a systematic effort to keep certain human capabilities relegated to the realm of pseudoscience, to prevent serious research into abilities that challenge our understanding of consciousness and physical reality. This suppression is not a conspiracy in the traditional sense. There is no shadowy organization actively working to hide the truth. The suppression is more subtle and more pervasive. It operates through academic gatekeeping, funding priorities, career incentives, and cultural assumptions that make certain research areas professionally toxic. Try to get funding to study telepathy, precognition, or psychokinesis. You will find that grant committees are not interested. Try to publish positive results in these areas in mainstream journals. You will face extraordinary skepticism and methodological nitpicking that studies in more conventional areas do not encounter.
Try to build an academic career researching these topics. You will find that tenure committees view such work as career suicide. The message is clear. Certain topics are off-limits. Certain human capabilities are not to be taken seriously. And researchers who ignore this unwritten rule pay the price. But why? Why would there be institutional resistance to researching human potential? If humans possess abilities beyond what mainstream science acknowledges, would not understanding those abilities be valuable? Would not confirming or refuting their existence be important scientific work? The resistance exists because confirming these abilities would require a fundamental revision of our scientific worldview. Modern science is built on a materialist foundation, the assumption that consciousness is produced by the brain, that perception is limited to the 5 physical senses, that information cannot be accessed except through physical means. If remote viewing works, if telepathy exists, if consciousness can access information independent of sensory input, then this entire framework collapses, and with it would collapse the authority of institutions built on that framework. The pharmaceutical industry that treats the brain as a chemical machine, the technology sector that assumes intelligence is computational, the educational system that trains analytical thinking while ignoring intuition, the economic system that values only measurable, quantifiable output. These industries and institutions have a vested interest in maintaining the current understanding of human capability, not because they are evil, but because their existence depends on that understanding being correct. They cannot accommodate a reality where human consciousness extends beyond the brain, where perception transcends the physical senses, where abilities they have no framework to explain or control actually exist. So the suppression happens not through active conspiracy, but through structural resistance. Funding flows to conventional research. Publications favor studies that confirm existing paradigms. Careers advance for those who work within accepted boundaries. And researchers who challenge those boundaries find themselves marginalized, their work dismissed as poor science, regardless of its actual quality. The history of parapsychology research illustrates this pattern. For over a century, researchers have been studying phenomena like telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition, using rigorous scientific methods. They have accumulated an enormous database of experimental results, showing effects that exceed chance by statistically significant margins. Meta-analyses of thousands of studies show consistent, replicable effects. Yet, mainstream science continues to insist that parapsychology has produced no convincing evidence. The goalposts keep moving. When researchers address methodological criticisms, new criticisms appear. When results are replicated across multiple laboratories, skeptics argue that the effect sizes are too small to matter. When large effect sizes are demonstrated, the studies are dismissed as statistical flukes or potential fraud. The level of evidence required to accept psi phenomena exceeds the level required for virtually any other area of science. This is not scientific skepticism. This is systematic rejection regardless of evidence. Why? Because accepting that consciousness can access information through non-physical means would invalidate the materialist framework that underlies modern science. It would mean that reality is fundamentally different from what we have been taught. It would mean that human potential extends far beyond what institutions of education, medicine, and commerce are designed to develop or utilize. The suppression extends to practical applications of expanded human capability. Throughout history, individuals and communities who developed extraordinary abilities often faced persecution. Shamans and mystics were branded as heretics or witches. Healers who could cure through non-conventional means were prosecuted for practicing medicine without a license. Communities that maintained alternative ways of knowing were forcibly assimilated or eliminated. This was not just religious persecution. It was cultural suppression of abilities and knowledge that threatened established power structures. A population that can heal itself has no need for pharmaceutical medicine. A population that can access information intuitively has less dependence on official sources of knowledge. A population that develops expanded consciousness is harder to control through propaganda and manipulation. The witch hunts of early modern Europe are often explained as religious hysteria or misogyny, and these factors certainly played a role. But look deeper at who was targeted. Midwives with knowledge of herbal medicine, healers who could cure diseases that physicians could not, women who lived outside patriarchal family structures and maintained independence through their skills and knowledge. These were not random victims. These were people who possessed practical abilities that represented alternatives to the emerging systems of institutional medicine and social control. By eliminating these individuals and destroying their knowledge, European society ensured that healing and medical knowledge would flow through official channels, controlled by universities and professional guilds. The suppression was not just about religion. It was about power, control, and the monopolization of knowledge. The same pattern appears in the colonization of indigenous peoples. Missionaries and colonial administrators did not just seek to convert indigenous peoples to Christianity. They systematically destroyed indigenous knowledge systems, outlawed traditional practices, and separated children from their communities to be educated in Western schools, where their languages, beliefs, and ways of knowing were forcibly erased. This was not just cultural genocide. It was suppression of alternative ways of being human, ways that included abilities and knowledge that challenged the superiority of Western civilization. Indigenous peoples who could navigate without instruments, who could identify hundreds of medicinal plants, who could enter altered states of consciousness to access information, who maintained sustainable relationships with their environments, represented living refutations of the narrative that Western civilization was the pinnacle of human achievement. So the knowledge had to be destroyed. The practices had to be outlawed. The children had to be assimilated, and the abilities that indigenous peoples possessed had to be redefined as primitive superstition rather than valid human capabilities that Western civilization had lost. In the modern era, the suppression is less overt, but no less effective. It operates through education systems that train analytical thinking while dismissing intuition as unreliable. Through medical systems that treat the body as a machine and ignore the role of consciousness in healing. Through scientific institutions that refuse to seriously investigate phenomena that do not fit materialist assumptions. Through media that portrays expanded human abilities as entertainment or fraud rather than as real possibilities. The message is reinforced constantly. The rational, analytical, materialist view of reality is correct. Anything that suggests otherwise is delusion, wishful thinking, or pseudoscience. Humans are limited to 5 senses. Consciousness is produced by the brain. Free will is an illusion, and extraordinary abilities are impossible. This is not just scientific consensus. This is cultural programming designed to keep people from exploring their full potential. Because people who discover they have abilities beyond what they have been taught are people who will question other things they have been taught. They will question authority. They will question whether the systems and institutions that govern their lives are actually necessary or beneficial. They will question whether the trade-offs that civilization demands are worth what is lost. This is dangerous to established power, not because expanded human abilities are themselves threatening, but because people who possess them become harder to control through conventional means. They are less dependent on institutions. They are less susceptible to manipulation. They are more confident in their own perceptions and judgments. So the suppression continues, not through overt force in most cases, but through subtler mechanisms, through ridicule and dismissal, through professional consequences for those who take such things seriously, through cultural narratives that define expanded abilities as impossible, unscientific, or the domain of charlatans and fools. Consider what happens to public figures who speak openly about their experiences with expanded consciousness or anomalous abilities. They are mocked. Their credibility is questioned. They are asked if they have evidence, knowing that the types of experiences they describe are subjective and not easily captured by conventional scientific methods. They are invited to submit to tests designed by skeptics who have already decided the abilities do not exist, and whose experimental protocols are designed to confirm their bias rather than to genuinely investigate. The result is that most people who have these experiences keep them private. They do not speak publicly about their expanded perceptions, their intuitive knowing, their moments of telepathic connection, their healing abilities, because they know they will not be believed and will face social consequences for sharing. The suppression works through making it socially unacceptable to acknowledge what many people privately experience. This creates a false consensus because people do not speak openly about their experiences. Everyone assumes such experiences are rare or non-existent. The reality is that surveys consistently show large percentages of the population report experiences of telepathy, precognition, clairvoyance, and other expanded abilities. But these reports are dismissed as anecdotes, not taken seriously as data points about human capability. The pharmaceutical industry has a particularly strong interest in suppression. If consciousness can influence healing, if meditation can reduce inflammation, if breathwork can modulate immune function, if dietary changes can reverse chronic disease, then the market for pharmaceutical interventions shrinks. The industry cannot monetize practices that individuals can do themselves at no cost. It can only monetize drugs, procedures, and technologies that require professional administration and corporate production. So research funding flows toward pharmaceutical solutions and away from consciousness-based interventions. Medical education trains doctors to prescribe drugs and perform procedures, not to teach patients how to activate their own healing capacity. Insurance reimbursement favors billable interventions over practices like meditation that cost nothing but produce measurable health benefits. The suppression is economic as much as it is scientific or cultural. Expanded human capability is not profitable for industries built on human limitation and dependence. A population that develops its full potential is a population that needs less from the systems that currently provide education, healthcare, entertainment, and meaning. This is perhaps the deepest reason for suppression. Civilization as we know it depends on people being limited, dependent, and unaware of their full capability. The systems that structure modern life require humans to be smaller than we are, to need what they provide, to accept that we cannot trust our own perceptions, instincts, and abilities. If people discovered they could do more, be more, perceive more than they have been taught, the entire structure of modern civilization would be called into question. Not because expanded human abilities directly threaten any specific institution, but because people with access to their full potential would make different choices about how to live. They would need less. They would accept less. They would demand more from life than what consumerism and careerism and conventional success provide. The suppression, ultimately, is about keeping people small, limited, dependent, and controllable. It is about maintaining systems that benefit from human diminishment. And it works because most people never realize they are being kept from their full potential. They accept the limitations as natural, inevitable, the way things are. But the suppression is not total. It cannot be. Because human capability keeps reasserting itself. Indigenous peoples maintain their abilities despite centuries of attempted eradication. Individuals spontaneously develop extraordinary capacities, despite having no cultural support or training. Researchers continue to investigate forbidden topics despite professional risks. Practitioners share techniques for expanding human potential despite institutional resistance. The abilities we have been discussing cannot be permanently suppressed because they are inherent to human biology. They are part of what we are. Suppression can make them rare, can make them socially unacceptable, can make them professionally dangerous to investigate, but it cannot make them disappear. And now, with global communication and information sharing, the suppression is becoming harder to maintain. People from around the world can share their experiences, compare notes, discover that what they thought was unique to them is actually common. Researchers can collaborate across institutions and countries, making their work harder to marginalize. Practitioners can share techniques and results, building communities around expanded human development. The suppression is real. It has been effective, but it is not absolute, and it is beginning to crack. The question is whether enough people will recognize what has been done, understand why it has been done, and make the choice to reclaim what has been suppressed. Because ultimately, the suppression only works if we accept it, if we believe what we have been told about our limitations, if we do not question the narratives that define normal human capability, if we do not explore our own potential to discover what lies beyond the boundaries we have been taught to respect. The suppression continues because it serves powerful interests, but those interests only maintain power if we remain ignorant of our own capacity. The moment we begin to discover what we can actually do, the moment we stop accepting limitation as inevitable, the entire structure of suppression begins to collapse, and that moment is coming. Can we get them back? The answer is yes. Not maybe, not theoretically, not if we develop the right technology or discover the right genetic modification. Yes, now, with practices and lifestyle changes that are accessible to anyone willing to make them. The abilities we have been discussing throughout this exploration are not gone. They are dormant, and dormant capabilities can be awakened when the right conditions are created. We know this because it is happening. People around the world are recovering abilities that civilization suppressed. They are rediscovering what it means to be fully human. But before we discuss how, we need to be clear about what recovery means. This is not about becoming superhuman or developing magical powers. This is about recovering normal human function, the baseline capabilities that our ancestors possessed and that our biology is designed to express. We are not trying to transcend humanity. We are trying to reclaim it. The process begins with understanding that your body and mind are far more capable than you have been taught. The limitations you accept as natural are not inherent to being human. They are the result of living in an environment that does not require or support full human capability. Change the environment, and the capabilities emerge. Let us start with the physical foundation, because everything else builds on this. Your body needs to move. Not exercise in the way modern fitness culture defines it, but move in the full spectrum of ways humans evolved to move. Climbing, crawling, balancing, jumping, throwing, carrying, lifting, sprinting, walking long distances. Natural movement that engages the entire body requires constant adaptation to changing terrain and develops physical capability across all domains rather than specializing in narrow athletic skills. When you move this way regularly, your body begins to change. Bone density increases. Connective tissue strengthens. Proprioception improves. The nervous system develops better integration between sensation and action. You become more capable, more resilient, more confident in your physical body. This is not just fitness. This is genetic activation. You are telling your genes that physical capability matters, and they respond by expressing the programs that build that capability. Find environments that challenge you. Natural settings where the ground is uneven, where you have to navigate obstacles, where sensory input is rich and constantly changing. Your brain evolved for this. When you spend time in complex natural environments, neural plasticity increases. Your sensory systems sharpen. Your attention becomes more diffuse and more effective. You start perceiving things you did not notice before. This is not mystical. This is your nervous system responding to environmental demands. Modern environments are sensory poor, simple, predictable. Your brain adapts by narrowing perception, filtering out most potential input because it is not relevant for navigating modern life. Natural environments reverse this. They are too complex, too rich in information for narrow perception to be effective. Your brain adapts by expanding awareness, and abilities that were dormant begin to surface. Cold exposure is one of the most powerful tools for genetic unlocking. Start with cold showers. Work up to ice baths. If you live where winters are cold, spend time outside in minimal clothing. This is uncomfortable. That is the point. Comfort is the enemy of capability. Your body has extraordinary capacity for temperature regulation, for generating internal heat, for maintaining function in conditions that would seem unbearable. But these systems only activate when challenged. After consistent cold exposure, you will notice changes. Better circulation, improved mood, enhanced mental clarity, deeper sleep. These are markers of improved metabolic function. Your mitochondria become more efficient. Brown adipose tissue activates. Hormonal balance improves. You are recovering metabolic flexibility that humans once had naturally. Heat exposure works similarly. Sauna use, particularly in the traditional Nordic style, with extreme heat followed by cold plunge, triggers genetic programs for stress resistance and cellular repair. Regular sauna use has been shown to reduce all-cause mortality, improve cardiovascular health, and enhance cognitive function. This is not just relaxation. This is hormesis, beneficial stress that makes you stronger. Fasting is another key intervention. Your body evolved for periods without food. Hunter-gatherers did not eat 3 meals a day plus snacks. They ate when food was available, and they went periods, sometimes days, without eating. This activated genetic programs for cellular cleanup, metabolic flexibility, and enhanced cognitive function during food scarcity. Modern humans eat constantly, and our bodies never access these ancient programs. Start with intermittent fasting, compressed eating windows. Work up to longer fasts if appropriate for your health status. During fasting periods, you will notice changes in perception. Senses sharpen, mental clarity improves. Energy levels, after an initial adjustment, often increase. This is not starvation. This is your body shifting into an ancestral metabolic state where different capabilities activate. Dietary quality matters enormously. The modern diet of processed foods, refined carbohydrates, and seed oils is inflammatory, metabolically destructive, and cognitively impairing. Return to whole foods, primarily plants, quality proteins, and healthy fats. Eliminate foods that did not exist before industrial agriculture. This is not about following a specific diet ideology. This is about providing your body with the nutritional inputs it evolved to process. When you clean up your diet, remove inflammatory foods, and provide proper nutrients, your body begins to repair damage that has accumulated over years of poor nutrition. Inflammation decreases, gut health improves, hormonal balance restores, brain fog lifts. These physical improvements are prerequisites for recovering more subtle capabilities. You cannot develop enhanced sensory perception or expanded consciousness when your body is constantly stressed by inflammatory foods and nutritional deficiencies. Specific nutrients support specific aspects of recovery. Iodine for thyroid function and pineal gland health. Magnesium for over 300 enzymatic processes, including neurotransmitter production. Vitamin K2 to prevent calcification and direct calcium to bones rather than soft tissues. Omega-3 fatty acids for brain structure and anti-inflammatory effects. These are not supplements to add to a poor diet. These are essential nutrients that modern diets often lack. Eliminating toxins is crucial, particularly fluoride. Filter your water. Use fluoride-free toothpaste. Avoid processed foods where fluoride accumulates. Fluoride preferentially accumulates in the pineal gland, calcifying the tissue and potentially interfering with its function. Removing this source of calcification is one of the most important steps for recovering expanded consciousness and perception. Sleep quality determines how well your body can implement all these changes. Modern sleep is disrupted by artificial light, irregular schedules, electronic devices, and chronic stress. Return to natural sleep patterns. Darken your sleeping environment completely. Reduce blue light exposure after sunset. Establish consistent sleep and wake times aligned with natural light cycles. Your body produces melatonin in darkness, and melatonin does far more than promote sleep. It is a powerful antioxidant. It regulates circadian rhythms throughout the body, and it may play a role in consciousness and perception. sunlight exposure is equally important. Morning sunlight sets your circadian clock. Daytime sunlight provides vitamin D and other photochemical effects on health. Lack of natural light is one of the most damaging aspects of modern indoor life. Spend time outside daily. Face the sun during the first hour after sunrise. This simple practice has profound effects on hormonal balance, mood, energy, and sleep quality. These physical interventions create the foundation, but recovering the abilities we have been discussing requires more than physical optimization. It requires changes in consciousness and perception. Meditation is the most direct tool for this. Not meditation as relaxation or stress reduction, though it provides these benefits. Meditation as training for expanded awareness, for accessing states of consciousness beyond ordinary waking mind. There are many traditions and techniques. Find one that resonates and practice it consistently. What you will discover through meditation is that consciousness is not fixed.
The normal waking state, the voice in your head, the constant stream of thoughts and judgments. This is not the only mode of awareness available. There are other states, accessed through specific practices, where perception expands, where the boundary between self and other becomes more fluid, where information becomes accessible through means you cannot explain. These states are not mystical or supernatural. They are natural human consciousness, operating in modes that modern life has made rare. Hunter-gatherers accessed these states regularly through their lifestyle and practices. We must access them deliberately through training, because our normal life does not provide the conditions that naturally produce them. Breathwork is another powerful tool. Specific breathing patterns can rapidly shift consciousness, activate or calm the nervous system, and produce altered states. The Wim Hof Method combines breathing with cold exposure. Holotropic breathwork uses extended, rapid breathing to produce non-ordinary states of consciousness. Pranayama from yogic traditions includes dozens of breathing techniques with different effects. Breath is the bridge between conscious and unconscious, between voluntary and autonomic. Learning to control your breath gives you access to systems you were taught are beyond control. Heart rate, blood pressure, stress response, immune function. All of these can be influenced through breathwork. This is not theory. This is demonstrated, measured, reproducible. Sensory deprivation can accelerate perceptual changes. Float tanks eliminate external sensory input, allowing your nervous system to reset and your perception to turn inward. Regular float practice produces measurable reductions in stress, improvements in creativity, and enhanced body awareness. Some practitioners report experiences of expanded consciousness, out-of-body states, or access to information through non-ordinary means. Time in wilderness is essential. Not hiking on trails while listening to podcasts, but genuine immersion in wild environments where you are present, attentive, and engaged with what is around you. Spend nights sleeping outside under stars. Walk long distances without destinations. Sit in one place and observe until the environment accepts your presence, and animals resume their normal behavior around you. This practice develops the hunting consciousness we discussed earlier. the diffuse awareness where perception expands beyond focused attention. You cannot force this state. You can only create the conditions that allow it to emerge. Quiet mind, present awareness, extended time in complex natural environments. The state arises naturally when you stop trying and simply allow yourself to be part of the landscape. Tracking is one of the most powerful practices for developing perception. Learn to read tracks, to follow animals, to observe the subtle signs of life moving through the environment. This trains observation, pattern recognition, and inference. But it also develops something deeper: the ability to connect with the animal, to intuit its movements, to know where it will go. Experienced trackers describe this not as analysis, but as knowing. They become the animal in some sense, and from that state, tracking becomes intuitive. Plant medicine, used responsibly and in proper context, can provide direct experience of expanded consciousness. Psilocybin mushrooms, ayahuasca, peyote. These have been used by indigenous cultures for millennia to access non-ordinary states and develop abilities. Modern research is confirming that these substances, used therapeutically, can produce lasting, positive changes in personality, perception, and consciousness. This is not recreational drug use. This is intentional engagement with powerful tools for consciousness expansion. These substances should be approached with respect, proper preparation, experienced guidance, and integration work to understand and incorporate the experiences they produce. They are not necessary for recovery of abilities, but they can accelerate the process by providing direct experience of consciousness states that practice alone might take years to access. Community matters. Find others who are on this path. The journey of recovering human capability is easier with support, shared experience, and collective practice. There are growing communities around ancestral health, natural movement, meditation, breathwork, and expanded human potential. Connect with them. Share your experiences. Learn from others who are further along the path. But be discerning. Not everyone claiming to teach these things actually understands them. There are charlatans, cult leaders, and deluded individuals in every field related to human potential. Use critical thinking. Evaluate teachers based on their results, their integrity, and their ability to produce measurable changes in their students. Trust your intuition about who to learn from, but verify with evidence. Start where you are. You do not need to move to the wilderness, quit your job, and dedicate your life to this. Start with small changes. Add cold showers. Practice intermittent fasting. Spend more time outside. Learn a meditation technique and practice daily. Eliminate fluoride. Improve your diet. Move your body in natural ways. These changes accumulate. Small shifts in lifestyle produce small shifts in capability. Maintain the changes and expand them gradually. Within months, you will notice differences. Better physical health, yes, but also enhanced perception, improved intuition, moments of knowing that you cannot explain. These are signs that dormant capabilities are beginning to wake up. As changes accumulate, they accelerate. Improved health supports better sleep, which supports better recovery, which allows more challenging practices, which produce greater adaptations. Physical changes support consciousness changes, which support perceptual changes, which support further physical development. The systems reinforce each other in positive feedback loops. Be patient. These abilities did not disappear overnight, and they will not return overnight. Recovery is a process, not an event. There will be breakthroughs and plateaus. Progress is not linear. But if you maintain the practices, if you create and sustain the environmental conditions that support full human capability, the abilities will return. You will know when it is working, not because someone tells you, but because you will feel different, more alive, more present, more capable. You will perceive more, sense more, know more. You will have experiences that should not be possible according to what you were taught about human limitation. Trust those experiences. They are real. They are your biology expressing its full potential. This path is not for everyone. It requires dedication, discomfort, and willingness to be different from the normalized modern human. It requires questioning everything you have been taught about your limitations. It requires making choices that friends and family may not understand. It requires stepping outside the comfortable bounds of conventional life. But for those who feel the call, who sense that they are meant for more than what civilization offers, who remember at some deep level that humans once possessed capabilities now forgotten, this path is not optional. It is the way home, back to full human capability, back to the abilities our ancestors possessed, back to what we were always meant to be. The abilities can be recovered. The genetic lock can be opened. The suppression can be overcome, not through technology or pharmaceutical intervention, but through lifestyle, practice, and environmental change. The tools are available. The knowledge exists. The path is clear. The only question remaining is whether you will walk it. Because ultimately, this is not about ancient humans and lost abilities. This is about you, about what you are capable of, about whether you will accept the diminished existence that civilization offers, or whether you will reclaim the full spectrum of human potential that is your birthright. The choice is yours. The abilities are waiting. And the time to begin is now. Closing. We started this journey with a discovery in a cave in Spain. Skeletal remains showing anatomical features that suggested greater capabilities than modern humans possess. Evidence of a time when humans could do things we now consider impossible. We have traced the path from those ancient humans to where we are now. We have examined what was lost in the transition from hunter-gatherer to agricultural to industrial life. We have identified the mechanisms of suppression that keep most people from even knowing what they have lost. We have looked at the survivors, the people who have maintained or recovered extraordinary abilities, and we have mapped the path back. Not to primitivism or rejection of all that civilization has achieved, but to integration, taking the best of what modern knowledge and technology offer, while recovering the capabilities that were sacrificed along the way. You now know what was lost. You know why it was lost. You know who benefits from keeping you small and limited.
and you know that recovery is possible. Not for some, for you. The story we have been told about human evolution is incomplete. We did not progress linearly from primitive to advanced. We traded certain capabilities for others. We exchanged direct connection with nature for technological mastery. We sacrificed enhanced perception for analytical thinking. We gave up extraordinary physical capacity for security and comfort. Some of those trades may have been worth it, but others were not, and we never made them consciously. We never understood what we were giving up. We called it progress and advancement without calculating the cost. Now we know the cost. Now we can make different choices. Now we can reclaim what was lost while keeping what was gained. This is not the end of the story. This is the beginning, not of ancient history, but of your personal journey back to full human capability. The path is laid out. The tools are provided. The obstacles are identified. What happens next depends entirely on what you choose to do with this knowledge. You can return to normal life, forget what you have learned, accept the comfortable limitations that civilization imposes. Many will make this choice. It is easier, it requires nothing. Or you can begin the work of recovery. You can start implementing the practices, making the lifestyle changes, creating the conditions that allow dormant capabilities to awaken. You can discover firsthand what you are truly capable of. The ancient humans we spoke of at the beginning are not separate from you. They are your ancestors. Their DNA is your DNA. Their capabilities are encoded in your genome, waiting for the right conditions to express. You are them, living in different circumstances, and you can recover what they had. 10,000 years ago, we made a choice at the species level. We chose agriculture, civilization, the path that led to where we are now. That choice brought us writing, mathematics, art, science, all the achievements of human culture. But it also cost us abilities that made us more than we are now. We cannot undo that choice. We cannot go back to being hunter-gatherers in the original sense. But we can make a new choice, as individuals and eventually as a species. We can choose to reclaim the abilities while keeping the knowledge. We can choose to be fully human again, expressing the complete spectrum of capabilities that our biology contains. This is the real meaning of human potential. Not becoming something we are not, but reclaiming everything we have always been. Not transcending humanity, but fully embodying it. The abilities you have learned about in this exploration are not supernatural. They are not magic. They are biology. Your biology. And they are available to you now, in this lifetime, if you are willing to do what it takes to recover them. The question posed at the beginning was, we found the real reason humans lost their superpowers 10,000 years ago. We have answered that question. The reason was agriculture and the civilization it enabled. The environmental and lifestyle changes that came with settled farming life suppressed capabilities that were no longer necessary for survival. But the more important question is the one we end with. Can you get them back? Yes, you can. Will you? That is up to you.